These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Gabi.com. Gabi takes the pain out of insurance shopping. More info at Gabi.com/Tom. Bowl and Branch Sheets, crafted for the common good. More info at bowlandbranch.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. And Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Health. For more information, teethhealth.com, code TOM.
We say fight back!
Our book for today is Kickback, Exposing the Global Corporate Bribery Network by David Montero. This is from the introduction, Chapter 1. During Watergate, the appointment of a special prosecutor to investigate Richard Nixon's alleged tampering with elections was intended to mark the close of a sordid chapter in American history. Instead, that effort, culminating in Nixon's resignation, would prove to be only the beginning of a deeper political morass that America would face for decades to come. Congressional investigations would uncover for the first time that multinational corporations, through slush funds and bribes, were not only secretly funding political organizations at home, like Nixon's re-election campaign, but corrupting foreign officials abroad. This new perspective on the corporate abuse of power and its impact overseas would result in the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, FPCA, groundbreaking legislation that, by prohibiting commercial bribery for the first time in history, sought to change how capitalism and political affairs were conducted all around the world. Now, more than 40 years later, we are experiencing a kind of déjà vu as the special counsel investigates whether the president allegedly abused his power, again by obstructing an inquiry into a possible manipulation of our country's elections. Just as was the case in Watergate, whatever special counsel Robert Mueller uncovers will likely mark the beginning, rather than the end, of a reassessment of how power actually operates in this country. And just as in Watergate, there's the possibility that Mueller's far-reaching probe may reveal how tightly political corruption and corporate corruption are linked through bribery, just under the surface of America's political life. Nixon was the recipient of secret corporate donations, which were considered illegal because they should have been disclosed. But the payments, while unlawful, did not compromise the presidential election itself. Mueller's Russian inquiry is directed at a potentially far more serious crime, whether Donald Trump, the head of a sprawling business empire, colluded with a foreign power to deliberately sway the American electorate, committing the very crime that the FCPA had been trying to eradicate since Watergate, the offer of a foreign bribe, a kickback. That law specifically states that a corporate bribe need not involve an actual exchange of money. An offer of anything of value, such as a promise to a foreign government official, is sufficient to violate its terms. This is precisely what Mueller is trying to ascertain, whether Trump, his company, his associates, or his family, or some combination of them, offered a promise to Russian government officials, a quid pro quo, that if they helped Trump by manipulating the elections, Trump, if victorious, would ease U.S. sanctions against Russia. Doing so would allow greater U.S. investment of Russia and would benefit Russian officials and oligarchs, the Trump Business Organization, the corporate interests of the Trump family, and former members of his senior staff, including Paul Manafort, his one-time campaign chairman, and Michael Flynn, his disgraced national security advisor. If the Trump Organization or anyone connected with it did make such a promise, and depending on how that promise was conveyed to Russian officials, the Justice Department would have strong grounds for pursuing an FCPA charge, among others. An FCPA violation is within Mueller's mandate to investigate, quote, any matters that arose or may arise directly from this investigation. As has been widely observed, Mueller has hired 2 former federal law enforcement officials with extensive experience in investigating fraud, money laundering, and overseas bribery. Andrew Weissman, who ran the Justice Department's fraud section, which enforces the FCPA, and Greg Andres, who helped oversee FCPA policy in the criminal division. The drama playing out in Washington starkly highlights the fact that foreign corporate bribery can be a deeply misleading term. We have come to regard it, when we think of it at all, as something that unscrupulous companies do in distant countries, so that any impact it has must be contained overseas. If a corporation pays kickbacks to a greedy government official abroad, why should we be concerned? But in a highly interconnected world, bound together by a global market, a global financial system, and the constant migration of peoples, goods, capital, corruption rarely stays out there. Bribes eventually harm Americans, American society, American values, and American interests, both domestically and around the world, in ways that are difficult to gauge. Why do firms resort to bribery? The obvious reason is to gain an advantage over their competitors. But illicit payments also buy the illusion of growth in the short term, of increased market share and inflated firm value. It does not take into account the harm that this practice causes to companies themselves, sinking employee morale, diminished profit margins, and the possibility of hundreds of millions of dollars in fines and penalties, not to mention a reputation that will be associated with corruption and deceit. They also effectively steal the public's money, because the majority of bribery cases involve capital-intensive development and infrastructure projects such as roads, dams, defense systems, oil extraction, or mining that are publicly funded. To recoup the bribes involved in winning such contracts, companies conspire with foreign officials to inflate the costs, sometimes by 10 or even hundreds of millions of dollars. While the companies and the officials win out, taxpayers are left shouldering the burden. Corporate bribes involve a remarkable amount of money. The World Bank has estimated $1 trillion a year, although this may represent the high end. Others have placed the market at 10% of the $4 trillion spent annually on global public procurement. The book Kickback by David Montero.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, happy Tuesday. Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you. The Supreme Court hearings, or the congressional hearings, the Senate hearings, about Donald Trump's nomination of Amy Coney Barrett to be the ninth justice of the Supreme Court, replacing Ruth Bader Ginsburg, have been continuing. They just went into recess literally a minute or two ago. The chairman, Lindsey Graham, said that he would call a 45-minute break. So presumably in about 45 minutes from now, we will be back to hearings. And like yesterday, we will carry them, with an occasional commentary or interruption, but by and large, we will carry them throughout this program today and tomorrow. And in fact, because tomorrow is the third day of the hearings and the last day of the hearings, in all probability, Congressman Mark Pocan's first hour, where he takes your calls, will be moved to Thursday. We're talking with his office right now about that, and I'm not sure if anything has boiled down. I thought one of the most interesting things from this morning's questioning of Judge Barrett, and more than interested in hearing your thoughts on this as well. We can just open this up and have a conversation about it, particularly if you caught something I missed. I mean, I was doing show prep this morning, looking through the news. I mean, it's the 3 hours before I go on the air are pretty busy. And so it's entirely possible that I missed something altogether, something that happened. And so, if you think there was anything that you spotted, feel free to give us a shout, 202-808-9925. But, I think this and Joe Biden has now come out and said, I'm not a big fan of court packing, was his phrase. But he refused to rule it out. But he said, I'd really rather talk about real issues. This is not a real issue right now. The Republican Party is trying to make it a real issue. I mean, this is kind of, the new, but her emails kind of story. But, there's that. But the one thing that really struck me was, and I believe it was under questioning from Dianne Feinstein, Judge Barrett was asked about the status of laws that protect LGBTQ people, gay rights laws, gay marriage laws, things like that. And her answer, she said, words to the effect, I don't have the exact quote right in front of me here. In fact, I'm guessing we'll be getting transcripts in the next probably half hour or so in the main media. But what I heard her say, or what I thought I heard her say, was that she would not discriminate against a person based on their sexual preference. That rather caught my attention, because sexual preference is a phrase that people who argue that gay people can be converted use. Right? This is Michelle Bachmann's husband's business, you'll recall, was using Christianity and religion to and some weird voodoo psychotherapy to help gay people, specifically gay men. I mean, this was his business. And you can draw your own inferences from who he was and what he was all about. But converting gay men back to being straight. Because, after all, it's a preference. A preference implies, it shouts, choice, right? A person chooses to be gay or not to be gay. And, all the science basically denies that by the time kids are 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, somewhere in that window, they have largely figured out, who they are and where they fit and all this. So, that's not an always. Obviously, human beings, there's a huge variety of us. But this whole preference thing, rather than gender identity, which is, arguably still a soft way of saying that a person has chosen this identity. But it's not a dog whistle for are you choosing to be gay or not. So I'm hopeful somebody will drill down on that and just ask her, do you think that people choose to be gay? Do you think that people who have chosen to be gay in your mind can choose to become straight? I mean, we've seen a lot. I've known people growing up back when homosexuality was criminal in the United States. When I was a kid, when I was in high school, when I was a young man, well, through probably half my life, gay behavior, homosexual behavior in this country, in many states, in fact, probably in most states, was criminalized. And, that's one of the concerns, is not just that she's going to knock down gay marriage, but that she's going to allow the states to recriminalize consenting behavior between consenting adults. The other thing was abortion. Abortion obviously is a big issue today. And Senator Gary Peters came out yesterday, and this is just amazing. Senator Peters, by the way, Gary Peters is a really good guy. He's a senator from Michigan. He's in Michigan. He's most famous for riding a motorcycle and drinking beer. He's a Democrat. He's a progressive Democrat. In fact, he's one of the more progressive Democrats in the United States Senate. Gary Peters is a good guy. And yesterday, he revealed the story of back in the late 1980s in Detroit. He and his then wife, Heidi, were pregnant with their second child. And in the 4th month of the pregnancy, and this is, one of the touchstone issues, I think. In the 4th month of their pregnancy, she lost her amniotic fluid. Her water broke. Now, that's not supposed to happen until, hours or days before birth. Typically, that presages birth. And the reason why is because the amniotic fluid, this water that fills the womb and surrounds the baby, protects that baby, keeps that baby, safe and alive. And if that amniotic fluid goes away, particularly in the 4th month, the baby's going to die. And typically what you would do is induce an abortion at that point, because this baby is dead or is going to be dead very soon. And it's not, and every minute represents a danger, a threat to the mother, literally to the life of the mother. And Laura Bassett wrote a summary about this over on Ellie.com. She said, Heidi was 4 months along with her when her water broke. The doctor told Peters to go home and wait for a miscarriage to happen naturally, but it didn't happen naturally. They went back to the hospital the next day. The doctor detected a faint heartbeat. He recommended an abortion because the fetus still had no chance of survival. But the abortion was not an option due to hospital policy banning the procedure. I wonder if this was the same hospital where Louise gave birth to our oldest child, which was St. Mary's in Livonia, Catholic hospital. They will not do abortions. So the couple went home again to wait for a miscarriage. Peter said the mental anguish one goes through is intense. They waited for several days until Heidi's health, his wife's health, was beginning to deteriorate. She was within a couple of days of dying because she now had a dead fetus inside her. The doctor said your situation is dire. You could lose your entire uterus in a matter of hours and possibly lose your life. The doctor went to the hospital board and said, may I please do this abortion? The hospital board said no. And, thankfully, Senator Peters had a friend who was on the board of another hospital and got them in quickly and saved his wife's life. But this is the kind of thing we're talking about here.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back in just a minute. We'll pick up your calls and thoughts on what's going on as well. I also have a pile of news to share with you as we go through today. And welcome back. Nathan in West Los Angeles. Hey, Nathan, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Morning. So I thought it was telling that Judge Barrett avoided every question posed. Her record stands for itself. Senator Feinstein, Senator Leahy both asked her about opinions that Scalia had written in the past, and Alito as well, I think. And Judge Barrett had historically mentioned or written that she agreed with the dissenting opinions of those judges where the Supreme Court had either upheld or overturned something that Scalia or Alito disagreed with, Roe v. Wade being one of the major ones, and the ACA the other. And Judge Barrett talked about, how she would be unbiased and avoids answering the question. And, of course, a lot of the Republican senators are talking about the Ginsburg rule. I don't have as much history on the Ginsburg rule. Do you know if that was RBG as
yeah, it's not a rule. This is a phrase that the Republicans have invented. And, because Ruth Bader Ginsburg was not the first person to come before the United States Senate and basically refused to answer any questions about how she would rule on specific cases. This goes back to the 19th century. But by calling it the Ginsburg rule, the Republicans think that they're making this all very, very palatable for the American public who might be concerned that Amy Coney Barrett is going to come in and basically flip the entire court 180, which obviously is what's going to happen.
Did you catch Senator?
This
Senator
is just
Lee?
like, by the way, Nathan, this is the same thing that Mitch McConnell did 4 years ago when he said that the reason he was holding up the nomination of Merrick Garland was because of the Biden rule. Well, there's no such thing as a Biden rule.
Right.
Joe Biden had once back in the 80s or 90s made some offhand comment about how, in nominating and doing hearings on a Supreme Court judge in the weeks before an election probably wasn't a good idea. Mitch McConnell twisted that around, turned it into a rule, and every Republican on the committee, you'll recall 4 years ago, who was questioned about why they would not hold hearings for Merrick Garland said, well, we're just following the Biden rule. It was BS then, it's BS now.
Did you catch Senator Lee right before they went to the break? The end of his
I heard
talk?
part of it.
Towards the end, he mentioned that Judge Barrett, he had something towards the end that was very, very twisted. I'm blanking on it now, but of course he asked Judge Barrett how she would make sure that and Judge Barrett, she had a very good answer. It was that she puts herself in the position of the person who the decision goes against, or the party whom the decision goes against. Senator Lee, of course, to go about doing that. How do you go about putting yourself in the position, putting yourself in the shoes of someone whose shoes you aren't in, shoes you haven't been in? But of course, why would he? That would.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same as how do you put yourself in the minds of the founders and framers? It's just or the people of the time. Now they've changed originalism. It's not we're channeling James Madison. Now it's we're channeling all the people around James Madison. David Korten, the guy who wrote When Corporations Rule the World, David and I will be having a webinar conversation on October 15th from 3:30 to 4:30 Eastern Time about my new book, The Hidden History of Monopolies, How Big Business Destroyed the American Dream. Check it out. I think you'll really enjoy the conversation we're going to have. More information is available at thomhartmann.com and on our Facebook page. Hey, we have a new video up for the supporters of our program over at thomhartmann.com. I really enjoy doing these separate from what we're doing on the air because sometimes I can say things that would be impolitic or inappropriate to say on the air. Like the name of the website that I'm talking about in this video, and I lay it out and share it with you on the video. It's ratbleepingthecourts.com, and the bleeping, of course, is a word that you just can't say on the air that starts with F. And this website is just outing these judges that Donald Trump and the Federalist Society have been sending through Mitch McConnell's Senate like a friggin' assembly line, and how unqualified they are, how hateful they are, how aggressively they've worked to screw students, to deny. Well, one of them actually said that women who are on birth control pills, that should be reason to fire people. Right? I mean, it's just insane. You can check it out over at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. Just to update you on a couple of things that are just like in the news, I just want to toss these in real quick and I'll get back to your phone calls here because I think probably most of our show today is going to be consumed with the hearings and my rants about the hearings. But a 25-year-old man in Nevada has now been confirmed as having gotten COVID-19 again. And what's interesting about this, the reason why we have been unable to develop a vaccine for the common cold, which is a coronavirus, is because the common cold mutates frequently. And every time they've developed a vaccine for common cold virus 123, it turns out it doesn't work for common cold virus 124. And so, because it's mutating constantly, it's impossible to develop a vaccine. It's a challenge that we have with flu. Half the time, because flu is constantly mutating, half the time the flu shots have very little effect against the main strain that's floating around because they guessed wrong a year in advance when they started developing the vaccine. Well, this guy was infected within a 48-day time frame, and he was definitely not just symptom-free, but virus-free in the middle of that time frame. He got COVID. He got sick, He didn't need to be hospitalized. He recovered. He was great. He got COVID again, only the second one was a different variation. One was the Chinese variety, the older variety. The other was the European variety, the newer variety. There are now 7 major mutations of this virus that we know of, and there's probably dozens of others. He got 2 different variations on it, and the second time he got so sick he had to go into the hospital and get oxygen. And this has been, totally nailed down now, which raises the question of, will a vaccine ever be effective, or is this going to be like the flu vaccine, where it's a gamble? Also, we learned that now the FBI says that not only this was in Ohio, this was a June meeting in Ohio of another right-wing fascist racist gang, and they were planning on kidnapping Ralph Northam, the governor of Virginia. It just doesn't stop. Anyhow, Roosevelt in Nata.
Hey.
Oh, how do you say that town in Louisiana, Roosevelt? How do you say your town?
Oh, I'm doing good. I had a bone to pick with you. Yeah, because you said that that they was practicing voodoo psychology, but what they was practicing was Christianity psychology. Yeah.
You're right. You're right. Voodoo has a respectable
people,
tradition. You're absolutely right, Roosevelt. I'm sorry. Voodoo has a respectable tradition. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. And I got another thing. Stem cell research that would kill Trump. Basically, was stem cell research.
Yeah. It actually specifically they tested the drugs on a line of tissue that was derived from an abortion. So yeah, spot on. You're absolutely right. Roosevelt, thanks for the call. Michelle in Pottstown, Pennsylvania. Hey, Michelle, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I wanted to talk about the foster care system. And the caller who brought up the ethics yesterday of bringing children into this world. If you're bringing children in, and the very sad reality is if they end up in the foster care system, there's some very great angels who become parents, but it is a underfunded system where kids get completely lost. And the reality is that 80 to 90% of them either end up as young adults in the criminal justice system, or they end up losing their lives at a very young age. And
I don't know that it's 80 or 90%, Michelle, and I don't see what that has to do with the Supreme Court hearings this morning. Nicholas from Mexico. Hey, Nicholas, what's on your mind?
Wow, that was quick. Hi, I'm actually calling you from Lexington, Kentucky, for a few more days, believe it or not. I've survived almost a month here. Oh, my God. What a part of the country this is, and McConnell running roughshod over the election here. What I wanted to talk to you about was
laughing about it.
It's surreal. It's evil.
Yeah.
It's evil afoot here, I swear. It's not a term I throw around.
But you got 40 seconds here, Nicholas, so what's your point?
About the gay issues in Barrett. And she was asked, she sidestepped the whole issue, I think, in my opinion. When she was asked, she said she would not discriminate against people due to their sexual preference, as you noted. What she did not say is that she would extend the right of marriage. Those are two very different things, and she sidestepped that entirely.
You're absolutely right.
And I think this is a dangerous woman. She's much smarter than I thought she was, and she sidestepped that so slyly that I just cringed when I heard that answer. And Feinstein should have followed that up with, would you extend the right to marriage? And Feinstein dropped the ball, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm with you. There will be other opportunities, and we'll see how it plays out. Nicholas, thank you for the call. I'm waiting for somebody to say, the Trump administration is, federalizing local police departments. Is that constitutional? I mean, let's identify some of the things that the Trump administration is doing that many of us think are unconstitutional. Ask her about that. I'm guessing we'll get the same, no, I'm not going to answer that question, answers, but we'll see.
The Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be back with more of your thoughts and mine and the news of the day as we continue with these hearings on the Supreme Court nomination of Amy Coney Barrett.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Today we're reading from Our book today is The Poisoned City, Flint's Water and the American Urban Tragedy by Anna Clark. This is from the prologue. On a hot day in the summer of 2014 in the Civic Park neighborhood in the Civic Park neighborhood where Pastor R. Sherman McCathern preached in Flint, Michigan, water rushed out of a couple of fire hydrants. Puddles formed on the dry grass and splashed the skin of the delighted kids who ran through it. But the spray looked strange. The water was coming out dark as coffee for hours, McCathern remembered. The shock of it caught in his throat. Something is wrong here. Something had been wrong for months. That spring, Flint, under the direction of state officials, turned off the darkening water that it had relied on for the drinking water that it had relied on for nearly 50 years. The city planned to join a new regional system called the Carignan Water Authority, and while it waited for the KWA to be built, it began bringing in its water from the Flint River. McCathern didn't pay much attention to the politicking around all this. He had enough to worry about with his busy parish. But after the switch, many of his neighbors grew alarmed at the water that flowed from their kitchen faucets and shower heads. They packed public meetings, wrote questioning letters, and protested at City Hall. They filled clear plastic bottles in their taps to show how the water looked brown or orange and sometimes had particulates floating in it. Showering seemed to be connected with skin rashes and hair loss. The water smelled foul. A sip of it put the taste of a cold metal coin on your tongue. But the authorities said everything was all right and you could drink it, so people did, McCathern said later. Residents were advised to run their faucets for a few minutes before using the water to get a clean flow. But as the months went by, the city plant tinkered with treatment and issued a few boil water advisories. State environmental officials said again and again that there was nothing to worry about. The water was just fine. Whatever their senses told them, whatever the whispers around town, whatever Flint's troubled history with powerful institutions telling them what was best for them, this wasn't actually hard for people like McCathern to believe. Public water systems are one of this country's most heroic accomplishments, a feat so successful that it's almost invisible. By making it a commonplace for clean water to be delivered to homes, businesses, and schools, we have saved untold lives from what today sound like antiquated diseases in a Charles Dickens novel: cholera, dysentery, typhoid fever. Here in Flint, it was instrumental in turning General Motors, founded in 1908 in Vehicle City, as the town was known, into a global economic giant. The advancing underground network of pipes defined the growing city and its metropolitan region, which boasted of being home to one of the strongest middle classes in the entire United States. McCathern is a tall, bald man with a thin mustache and a scratchy rasp in his baritone voice. At the time of the water switch, he had led the non-denominational Joy Tabernacle Church for about 15 years. It was founded in the YMCA in downtown Flint, where it held baptisms in the swimming pool. But in 2009, it made a home in Civic Park, where a Presbyterian church closed after 85 years and gave its sanctuary over to the young and hopeful congregation. By then, Civic Park, one of America's oldest subdivisions, was a desert of deserted, historically significant homes, the pastor said. Built between 1917 and 1919 by General Motors and DuPont and Company, along curving tree-lined boulevards, the tidy houses were designed for Flint's auto workers and their families. But over the years, the neighborhood was blighted by vacancy. Empty two-stories with lurching front porches and crumbling roofs sat alongside crisply painted homes where Flint residents, they sometimes call themselves Flintoids or Flintstones, still live their lives. When the sound of gunshots on the street outside interrupted services, McCathern gave a nod to the church musicians, urging them to play louder. Some called Joy Tabernacle a thug church, he said, but McCathern saw the good. The young men filling his pews built a proud society, if not by getting their names on the honor roll, then by tagging their names with spray paint. In the end, people just want to be seen. The ghosts of the past went well beyond Civic Park. Between General Motors and the United Auto Workers, the city had been a flourishing hub for American innovation. There were more than 100 different manufacturing establishments in town. 10 of them employed at least 1,000 people each.
And they not only made automobiles, but paints, varnishes, tools, dyes, cotton, textiles, and a wealth of other products. Flint had one of the highest per capita incomes in the entire nation. And despite being severely segregated, it was a magnet for African-American migrants from the South. When Vice President Hubert Humphrey stopped by during the campaign for the 1964 presidential election, he praised Flint for, quote, zooming ahead with unbelievable growth and progress. Workers earned wages that are very good, Humphrey said, and, quote, because of the great labor management program in the community over many years, there has been a constant rise in the standard of living, end quote. Away from the assembly lines and the executive suites, the people of Flint felt that the city just shouldn't be a place to work. It should also be a place to thrive. Charles Stewart Mott, an auto pioneer who became GM's single largest stockholder and three-term mayor, created a nationally renowned community schools program that provided education, skills-building workshops, and social influence and social services. The book, The Poison City.
On the Science Revolution, Dr. Justin Frank drops by on the current assessment of Trump's mental state. Meteorologist Dr. Jeff Masters will tell us about 2020's record-breaking hurricane season and how a hurricane can go from 40 to 110 miles an hour in just 24 hours. Tanya Sanarab from the Center for Biological Diversity is reporting on how massive wildlife imports are upping our future pandemic risk. Dr. Sam Metz is here on Medicare for All. He confirms a single payer provides better care for less money. Tune into the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. Welcome back. 34 minutes past the hour. Ray in Lancaster, California. What's on your mind, Ray?
Hey, Tom. You know, now I'm just livid with this GOP, the hypocritical GOP. Now that there's a real possibility that the Senate could be flipped, the GOP, they're worried about Democrats expanding the court. Now it's a pejorative term calling packing the court. But they're allowing this corrupt, unpopular president to pack the court with three judges. We can't fall with that. We have to be tough. I've called Kamala Harris's office twice now, just urging her and Joe not to give into the bullying. It's like a bully punching you in the nose and then telling you, "Oh, are you going to punch me back? Please don't punch me back." The GOP. What I told something I suggested to Kamala Harris when the GOP asked her, "Are you going to pack the court?" I told her to simply say, "Don't back away from it." She and Joe should say, "I'm going to hold up my oath to the American citizens and use the Constitution in any way I can to protect the health and welfare of the American citizens, unlike what you all are doing." So I'm fed up with them. I'm on Facebook and I'm encouraging people to call the senators and be tough. We cannot let people cannot fall into this game that the GOP are playing again. We got to be tough and pull the gloves off, Tom.
Right. Yeah. This reminds me of back in the 80s when Reagan and Limbaugh made it fashionable to accuse Democrats of being liberals. And the result of that was that for the better part of 15 or 20 years, Democrats refused to call themselves liberals because they were just so afraid that the conservatives would keep pointing fingers at them. You know, hey, bring it on. Bring it on. You think you're concerned I'm going to pack the court? Damn right. If I think that's the best thing for America, for the health and welfare of this country, I will do that. I will do whatever the Constitution allows, just as you have. There you go.
We got to be tough.
Take names and kick
Part
ass.
of our character as Democrats, we're nice, and that's a good character. But there's a time when we have to look at the big picture, the long run picture. What's good for America? We've got to stand up. We got to stand up to the bullies. We've got to be role models and stand up to the bullies, and they'll back down. And they will be. I tell people that the same people who are calling names and beating up on the Democrats, they're going to be in line enjoying the benefits now, just like Barack's renewable energy plan. They're in line enjoying the job. That he created. We got to be tough and look at the long run, the big picture, Tom.
Yeah, just like all those boomer Tea Partiers who were carrying signs that said, "Keep your government hands off my Medicare." Yeah, spot on. Ray, thanks a lot. Very, very well said. Tom in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Hey, Tom, what's up?
Tom, good morning. Yeah, I'm a lifelong Democrat, or I was. Now I'm an independent. And one of the reasons I am an independent, no longer a Democrat, is because of the abortion issue. And this is a difficult issue for us all within families across the nation. Nothing simple or easy to talk about. It's tough. But that's
so you think that police and courts should intervene in this difficult issue?
No, sir. I not at all. No. But
then what's your problem with the Democrats' position that it's not the job of the police and the courts?
Well, the Democratic Party they've made it sound like it's something that's simple, that it's something that you shouldn't have concern about.
No Democrat has ever said that, Tom. No Democrat has ever said, "Oh yeah, just get an abortion." No. This is getting an abortion for most people is a very difficult decision. Number one. Number two, in the second or third trimester, once there's a possibility of viability of the fetus, it's damn near impossible. Last year in the United States, there were around 6,000 what are called late-term abortions, third trimester abortions. Every single one of them involved a fetus that would have died on birth, was in the process of dying, was so severely malformed they could not have survived. I mean, these are god-awful, agonizing decisions. And when you insert the government into the middle of these decisions between a woman and her doctor, how would you feel, Tom, if you had to basically consult with the government before you had a vasectomy or something? I mean, actually, there's not even an analogy for this for men, because nothing that you and I do as men literally threatens our lives.
I agree with you 100% on that, Tom. But what I'm saying is that the Democratic Party has talked about it as a simple issue, and that's the fact of the matter.
They have not.
I think it is a
the Democratic Party has never. Tom, I'm sorry. I'm just not going to let you misrepresent this. I'm going to move along. The Democratic Party has never characterized abortion as a simple issue. Anthony in St. Augustine, well, I'll leave it at that. Anthony in St. Augustine, Florida. Hey, Anthony, what's in your mind?
Hey, Tom. It just occurred to me that that the discrimination, particularly against African Americans, was not only immoral but actually a violation of the 14th and 15th Amendments to the Constitution. So I was wondering if you would agree with me on that. It was actually
say that again. What did I miss?
That the discrimination, particularly against African Americans, was not only immoral, but actually a violation of the 14th and 15th Amendments to the Constitution.
Oh, certainly, and has been forever. I mean, this is why the Supreme Court saw fit in 1954 to overturn their own 1896 decision, the Plessy versus Ferguson separate but equal decision of 1896 was overturned with Brown v. Board, as Judge Barrett pointed out this morning in her questioning. I'm completely with you. And the 14th Amendment guarantees equal protection under the law, and the law regulates commerce. Right, it's right there in the Constitution. And if discrimination is happening in commerce, I mean, it was the Commerce Clause actually that Lyndon Johnson used, to go after people in the South after 1964, because he was saying, well, you've got ketchup in your diner that was made in Pennsylvania by Heinz, and you're selling it, so you're engaged in interstate commerce, so we can regulate you. Back to you, Anthony. I'm sorry.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, because the only amendment that was really repealed was prohibition. So, yeah. So
and then the other thing is people and I'm sorry. Finish your point, Anthony, and then I'll go off on my rant here.
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, the point that I wanted to make is that what we have heard repeatedly this morning, nobody's come out and said it in exactly these words, but essentially, and Anthony, thank you for the call, essentially what the Republicans have been saying, and they've been saying this for a long, long time, and Scalia and Thomas and Alito are solidly in this camp, is that because the Constitution does not say women have a right to an abortion, therefore, women don't have a right to an abortion. Because the Constitution does not say everybody has a right to vote, therefore, everybody doesn't have the right to vote. And what they're doing when they say that is they're completely flipping the Constitution upside down. I refer you to the 9th Amendment. The 9th Amendment says the enumeration of the Constitution of certain rights, right? Enumeration, listing, right? The list, numerical listing, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The enumeration of the Constitution. In other words, the Constitution has said, there are some things that, government can do. There's some things government can't do, blah, 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 blah. But this is the 9th Amendment. The enumeration of the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage other rights retained by the people. Now, the 10th Amendment goes on to say the same thing about the states. Basically, if the federal government didn't grab this power, that power belongs to the state. But the 9th Amendment that precedes it, that is more important than it in the minds of the people who wrote the Constitution, says if just because we did not grant a right to people in the Constitution does not mean they don't have that right. Government, well, I think I've made my point. I mean, this is just the insanity of these guys. Charles in Conway, South Carolina. We got a minute to the break. Charles, you got a quick one?
Yes, I heard Lindsey Graham this morning make reference to the fact that he was on TRICARE.
Right, because he's a JAG officer.
That doesn't mean he has to be.
Well, he's in the military. I don't think he's retired. He wasn't a couple of years ago. He was part-time reserves?
Well, I'm a disabled veteran. I'm on TRICARE for life. I was on TRICARE before this, and after I turned 65, I went to TRICARE for life, which permits me not have to pay for anything medically.
Right.
Just prescriptions.
Right. But are you calling, Charles, because you thought that only people who are disabled are eligible for TRICARE?
That's what I was wondering. Yes.
Yeah. I honestly don't know the answer to that question, Charles. I'm sorry. I'm not. I've never done a real deep dive into the various stages of military commitment, retirement, reserves, who's eligible for which benefits. So I'm sorry. I can't answer that question. Charles, thanks for the call. Every now and then I just don't know.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And when I don't know, I'll tell you. We'll be back. It's 45 minutes past the hour. The hearing should be resuming probably in the next 10 minutes, but we'll see. And welcome back. John and, hey, John, I'm going to put you on hold because you're listening on Sirius XM and they are in a commercial break right now. Barbara in Anderson, California. Hey, Barbara, what's up?
Oh, I would just, talk a lot about abortion. And I just might like to tell the ladies out there that there may be another option for them, and it's called a tubal ligation. And what happens is that you go in the hospital for about an hour, and they fix you so that you cannot have any more children. So
right, but just because a woman gets an abortion doesn't mean she never wants to have children. It may well mean that this is not an appropriate time for her to have children.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, maybe another option. Because when you're through having children, you don't have to worry about it,
No, I'm with you. I got a vasectomy. I mean, because the deal Louise and I had was she gave birth to 3 children. If either one of us was going to, go under the knife, it was going to be me because she'd already done her duty, as it were, been through her pain. Barbara, thank you for the call. John in Eden Prairie, Minnesota. Oh, John, I'm sorry. I did it to you again. I want to get that call in. Anthony in Seattle. Hey, Anthony, what's on your mind?
Hey, how you doing? I just wanted to talk about the late-term abortions. About 5 years ago, my wife and I lost our son at 7 months. We went in for for a test, and when they were looking at the fetus, or looking at our son, in the pictures, there was a growth that was on the back of his skull that he wasn't going to survive, and
oh my!
It was an issue that if he died in the womb, that then Katie might have lost her life, and it was an agonizing decision. But we ended up having to do a late-term abortion, and if it wasn't for the fact that the University Medical Center here in Seattle they're amazing people, and they've walked us through it so gently. It was, it's a hard thing for me to talk about. I'm sorry.
No, I get it.
Yeah,
Anthony.
it's I can't even imagine what would have happened if we didn't have that option, and the fact that they want to end that is just unforgivable.
It's terrible. It's terrible. Anthony, thank you for the call. They're back to the hearings, and Sheldon Whitehouse is speaking right now. So let's pick up the hearings. Maybe we can't pick up the hearings. I don't know.
Driving this process through at breakneck speed in the middle of a pandemic while the Senate is closed for safety reasons and while we're doing nothing about the COVID epidemic around us. We have a very awkward 180 from colleagues. Chairman, you figure
Is it clean phone? Blow off the live read, Sean.
Said back when it was Garland versus
Sean, can you hear me? Blow off the live read.
that of course, the American of course, said Mitch McConnell. That's long gone. Senator Grassley said the American people shouldn't be denied a voice.
Sheldon Whitehouse is talking, the Democrat.
Senator Cruz said, you don't do this in an election year. That's long gone. And our chairman made his famous hold the tape promise, if an opening comes in the last year of President Trump's term, we'll wait till the next election. That's gone too. So, plain hypocrisy and rush. My experience around politics is that when you find hypocrisy in the daylight, look for power in the shadows. Now, people may say, well, what does all this matter? This is a political parlor game. It's no big deal. Well, there's some pretty high stakes here that we've been talking about here on our side. And I'll tell you three of them right here. Roe versus Wade, Obergefell, and the Obamacare cases. Here's the GOP platform, the Republican platform, the platform of my colleagues on the other side of this aisle say that a Republican president will appoint judges who will reverse Roe, Obergefell, and the Obamacare cases. So if you have a family member with an interest in some autonomy over their body under Roe versus Wade, the ability to have a marriage, have friends marry, have a niece or a daughter or a son marry someone of their same sex, you've got a stake. And if you're one of the millions and millions of Americans who depend on the Affordable Care Act, you've got a stake. It's not just the platform over and over again. Let's start by talking about the Affordable Care Act. Here's the president talking about this litigation that we're gearing up this nominee for November 10th. In this litigation, he said, we want to terminate health care under Obamacare. That is the president's statement. So when we react to that, don't act as if we're making this stuff up. This is what President Trump said. This is what your party platform says. Reverse the Obamacare cases. Senator after senator, including many in this committee, filed briefs saying that the Affordable Care Act should be thrown out by courts. Why is it surprising for us to be concerned that you want this nominee to do what you want nominees to do? One quick stop on NFIB v. Sebelius, because a lot of this has to do with money. This is an interesting comparison. National Federation of Independent Businesses, until it filed the NFIB versus Sebelius case, had its biggest donation ever of $21,000. In the year that it went to work on the Affordable Care Act, 10 wealthy donors gave $10 million. Somebody deserves a thank you. So let's go on to Roe v. Wade. Same thing. Same thing. The president has said that reversing Roe v. Wade will happen automatically because he's putting pro-life justices on the court. Why would we not take him at his word? The Republican Party platform says it will reverse Roe. Why would we not comment on that and take you at your word? Senators here, including Senator Hawley, have said, I will vote only for nominees who acknowledge that Roe v. Wade is wrongly decided. And they're pledged to vote for this nominee. Do the math. That's a really simple equation to run. The Republican brief in June Medical said Roe should be overruled. So don't act surprised when we ask questions about whether that's what you're up to here. And finally, out in the ad world that you have spared yourself wisely, Judge Barrett, the Susan B. Anthony Foundation is running advertisements right now saying that you are set to give our pro-life country the court that it deserves. There's the ad with the voiceover. She's set. She's set. And then Roe, Obamacare cases, and Obergefell, gay marriage. National Organization for Marriage, the big group that opposes same-sex marriage, says in this proceeding, all our issues are at stake. Republican platform says it wants to reverse Obergefell. And the Republican brief filed in the case said same-sex relationships don't fall within any constitutional protection. So when we say the stakes are high on this, it's because you've said the stakes are high on this. You have said that's what you want to do. So how are people going about doing it? What is the scheme here? Let me start with this one. In all cases, there's big anonymous money behind various lanes of activity. One lane of activity is through the conduit of the Federalist Society. It's managed by was managed by a guy named Leonard Leo, and it's taken over the selection of judicial nominees. How do we know that to be the case? Because Trump has said so over and over again. His White House counsel said so. So we have an anonymously funded group controlling judicial selection run by this guy, Leonard Leo. Then in another lane, we have, again, anonymous funders running through something called the Judicial Crisis Network, which is run by Carrie Severino, and it's doing PR and campaign ads for Republican judicial nominees. It got single $17 million donation in the Garland Gorsuch contest. It got another single $17 million donation to support Kavanaugh. Somebody, perhaps the same person, spent $35 million to influence the makeup of the United States Supreme Court. Tell me that's good. And then over here, you have a whole array of legal groups, also funded by dark money, which have a different role. They bring cases to the court. They don't wind their way to the court, Your Honor. They get shoved to the court by these legal groups, many of which ask to lose below so they can get quickly to the court to get their business done there. And then they turn up in a chorus, an orchestrated chorus of amici. Now, I've had a chance to have a look at this, and I was in a case, actually, as an amicus myself, the Consumer Financial Protection Board case. And in that case, there were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 amicus briefs filed, and every single one of them was a group funded by something called Donors Trust. Donors Trust is a gigantic identity scrubbing device for the right wing, so that it says Donors Trust is the donor without whoever the real donor is. It doesn't have a business. It doesn't have a business plan. It doesn't do anything. It's just an identity scrubber. And this group here, the Bradley Foundation, funded 8 out of the 11 briefs. That seems weird to me when you have amicus briefs coming in little flotillas that are funded by the same groups but nominally separate in the court. So I actually attached this to my brief as an appendix. Center for Media and Democracy saw it, and they did better work. They went on to say which foundations funded the brief writers in that CFPB case. Here's the Bradley Foundation for $5.6 million to those groups. Here's Donors Trust, $23 million to those brief writing groups. The grand total across all the donor groups was $68 million to the groups that were filing amicus briefs, pretending that they were different groups. And it's not just in the Consumer Financial Protection Board case. You might say, well, that was just a one-off. Here's Janus, the anti-labor case that had a long trail through the court, through Friedrichs and through Knox and through other decisions. And SourceWatch and ProPublica did some work about this. Here's Donors Trust and Donors Capital Fund, and here's the Bradley Foundation, and they totaled giving $45 million to the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 groups that filed amicus briefs pretending to be different groups, and both of the lawyer groups in the case. Funded by Donors Trust, funded by Bradley Foundation and Janus. This is happening over and over and over again, and it goes beyond just the briefs. It goes beyond just the amicus presentations. The Federalist Society, remember this group that is acting as the conduit and that Donald Trump has said is doing his judicial selection? They're getting money from the same foundations. From Donors Trust, $16.7 million. From the Bradley Foundation, $1.37 million. From the same group of foundations total, $33 million. So you can start to look at these and you can start to tie them together. The legal groups, all the same funders over and over again, bringing the cases and providing this orchestrated chorus of amici. Then the same group also funds the Federalist Society over here. The Washington Post wrote a big expose about this, and that made Leonard Leo a little hot, a little bit like a burned agent. So he had to jump out, and he went off to go and do anonymously funded voter suppression work. Guess who jumped in to take over the selection process in this case for Judge Barrett? Harry Severino made the hop. So once again, ties right in together. So Center for Media and Democracy has done a little bit more research. Here's a Bradley Foundation memo that they've published. The Bradley Foundation is reviewing a grant application asking for money for this orchestrated amicus process. And what do they say in the staff recommendation? It is important to orchestrate, their word, not mine, important to orchestrate high caliber amicus efforts before the court. They also note that Bradley has done previous philanthropic investments in the actual underlying legal actions. So Bradley is funding, what do they call, philanthropically investing in the underlying legal action and then giving money to groups to show up in the orchestrated chorus of amici. That can't be good. And it goes on because they also found this email. This email comes from an individual at the Bradley Foundation, and it asks our friend Leonard Leo, who used to run the selection process, is there a 501c3 nonprofit to which Bradley could direct any support of the 2 Supreme Court amicus project other than Donors Trust? I don't know why they wanted to avoid the reliable identity scrubber Donors Trust, but for some reason they did. So Leonard Leo writes back on Federalist Society address. Now don't tell me that it isn't Federalist Society business. On Federalist Society, on his address, he writes back, yes, send it to the Judicial Education Project, which could take and allocate the money. And guess who works for the Judicial Education Project? Carrie Severino, who also helped select this nominee running the Trump Federalist Society selection process. So the connections abound. In the Washington Post article, they point out that the Judicial Crisis Network's office is on the same hallway in the same building as the Federalist Society, and that when they sent their reporter to talk to somebody at the Judicial Crisis Network, somebody from the Federalist Society came down to let them up. This more and more looks like it's not 3 schemes, but it's one scheme with the same funders selecting judges, funding campaigns for the judges, and then showing up in court in these orchestrated amicus flotillas to tell the judges what to do. On the Judicial Crisis Network, you've got the Leonard Leo connection, obviously. She hopped in to take over for him with the Federalist Society. You've got the campaigns that I've talked about, where they take $17 million contribution. That's a big check to write, $17 million. To campaign for Supreme Court nominees. No idea who that is or what they got for it. You've got briefs that she wrote. The Republican senators filed briefs in that NFIB case signed by Ms. Severino. The woman who helped choose this nominee has written briefs for Republican senators attacking the ACA. Don't say the ACA is not an issue here. And by the way, the Judicial Crisis Network funds the Republican Attorneys General. It funds RAGA, the Republican Attorney General's Association, and it funds individual Republican Attorneys General. And guess who the plaintiffs are in the Affordable Care Act case? Republican Attorneys General. Trump joined them because he didn't want to defend, so he's in with the Republican Attorneys General. But here's the Judicial Crisis Network campaigning for Supreme Court nominees, writing briefs for senators against the Affordable Care Act, supporting the Republicans who are bringing this case, and leading the selection process for this nominee. Here's the page off the brief. Here's where they are. Mitch McConnell, and on through the list. Senator Collins, Senator Cornyn, Senator Hoeven, Senator, who's still here? Marco Rubio. It's a huge assortment of Republican senators who carry. So this is to me, pretty big deal. I've never seen this around any court that I've ever been involved with, where there's this much dark money and this much influence being used. Here's how the Washington Post summed it up. This is a conservative activist behind-the-scenes campaign to remake the nation's courts, and it's a $250 million dark money operation. $250 million is a lot of money to spend if you're not getting anything for it. So that raises the question, what are they getting for it? Well, I showed the slide earlier on the Affordable Care Act, and on Obergefell, and on Roe versus Wade. That's where they lost. But with another judge, that could change. That's where the contest is. That's where the Republican Party platform tells us to look at how they want judges to rule, to reverse Roe, to reverse the Obamacare cases, and to reverse Obergefell and take away gay marriage. That is their stated objective and plan. Why not take them at their word? But there's another piece of it, and that is not what's ahead of us, but what's behind us. What's behind us is now 80 cases, Mr. Chairman, 80 cases under Chief Justice Roberts that have these characteristics. One, they were decided 5-4 by a bare majority. Two, the 5-4 majority was partisan in the sense that not one Democratic appointee joined the five. I refer to that group as the Roberts Five. It changes a little bit, as with Justice Scalia's death, for instance, but there's been a steady Roberts Five that has delivered now 80 of these decisions. And the last characteristic of them is that there is an identifiable Republican donor interest in those cases. And in every single case, that donor interest won. It was an 80-0, 5-4 partisan rout, ransacking. And it's important to look at where those cases went, because they're not about big public issues like getting rid of the Affordable Care Act, undoing Roe versus Wade, and undoing same-sex marriage. They're about power. And if you look at those 80 decisions, they fall into four categories over and over and over again. One, unlimited and dark money in politics. Citizens United is the famous one, but it's continued since with McCutcheon, and we've got one coming up now. Always the 5-4 unlimited money in politics, never protecting against dark money in politics, despite the fact that they said it was going to be transparent. And who wins when you allow unlimited dark money in politics? A very small group. The ones who have unlimited money to spend and a motive to spend it in politics. They win, everybody else loses. And if you're looking at who might be behind this, let's talk about people with unlimited money to spend and a motive to do it. We'll see how that goes. Next, knock the civil jury down. Whittle it down to a nub. The civil jury was in the Constitution, in the Bill of Rights, in our darn Declaration of Independence. But it's annoying to big corporate powers because you can swagger your way as a big corporate power through Congress. You can go and tell the president you put money into to elect what to do. He'll put your stooges at the EPA. It's all great until you get to the civil jury, because they have an obligation, as you know, Judge Barrett, they have an obligation under the law to be fair to both parties, irrespective of their size. You can't bribe them. You're not allowed to. It's a crime to tamper with a jury. It's standard practice to tamper with Congress. Political side, you don't want to be answerable before a jury. And so one after another, these 85-4 decisions have knocked down, whittled away at the civil jury, a great American institution. Third, first was unlimited dark money. Second was demean and diminish the civil jury. Third is weaken regulatory agencies. A lot of this money, I'm convinced, is polluter money. The Coke Industries is a polluter. The fossil fuel industry is a polluter. Who else would be putting buckets of money into this and wanting to hide who they are behind donors' trust or other schemes? And what if you're a big polluter, what do you want? You want weak regulatory agencies. You want ones that you can box up and run over to Congress and get your friends to fix things for you in Congress. Over and over and over again, these decisions are targeted at regulatory agencies to weaken their independence and weaken their strength. And if you're a big polluter, a weak regulatory agency is your idea of a good day. And the last thing is in politics, in voting. Why on earth the court made the decision a factual decision, not something appellate courts are ordinarily supposed to make, as I understand it, Judge Barrett. The factual decision that nobody needed to worry about minority voters in pre-clearance states being discriminated against, or that legislators would try to knock back their ability to vote. These five made that finding in Shelby County. against bipartisan legislation from both houses of Congress, hugely passed on no factual record. They just decided that that was a problem that was over on no record, with no basis, because it got them to the result that we then saw. What followed? State after state after state passed voter suppression laws. One so badly targeting African Americans that the two courts said it was surgically tailored to get after minority voters. And gerrymandering, the other great control. Bulk gerrymandering, where you go into a state, like the Red Map Project did in Ohio and Pennsylvania, and you pack Democrats so tightly into a few districts that all the others become Republican majority districts. And in those states, you send a delegation to Congress that has a huge majority of Republican members, like 13-5, as I recall, in a state where the party of the five, actually won the popular vote. You've sent a delegation to Congress that is out of step with the popular vote of that state. And court after court figured out how to solve that. And the Supreme Court said, nope, 5-4 again. Nope, we're not going to take an interest in that question. In all these areas where it's about political power for big special interests and people who want to fund campaigns and people who want to get their way through politics without actually showing up, doing it behind donors' trust and other groups, doing it through these schemes, over and over and over again, you see the same thing. 80 decisions, Judge Barrett. 80 decisions, an 80-0 sweep. I don't think you've tried cases, but some cases, the issue is bias and discrimination. And if you're making a bias case, as a trial lawyer, Lindsey Graham is a hell of a good trial lawyer. If he wanted to make a bias case, Dick Durbin's a hell of a good trial lawyer. If they wanted to make a bias case and they could show an 80-0 pattern, A, that's admissible, and B, I'd love to make that argument to the jury. I'd be really hard-pressed to be the lawyer saying, no, 80-0 is just a bunch of flukes. All 5-4, all partisan, all this way. So something is not right around the court. And dark money has a lot to do with it. Special interests have a lot to do with it. Donors' trust and whoever's hiding behind donors' trust has a lot to do with it. And the Bradley Foundation orchestrating its amici over at the court has a lot to do with it. So I thank you, Judge Barrett, for listening to me now a second time. And I think this gives you a chance for you and I to tee up an interesting conversation tomorrow. And I thank my colleagues for hearing me out.
Thank you, Senator Whitehouse. Senator Cruz.
Oh, Mr. Chairman, can I put 3 letters in unanimous consent?
Without objection.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Judge Barrett, welcome. Congratulations on being nominated. Congratulations on enduring the confirmation proceedings. And I think it is a particularly good thing. We've made it through what I guess you would call the top of the lineup of the questioning. And some of the smartest and frankly most effective questioners on the Democratic side. And I think it speaks volumes that collectively they've had very few questions for you.
And most effective.
And virtually none calling into question your credentials, which are impeccable.
Didn't make the cuts.
Your record, and what I think has been an extraordinary life you've led. So that should be the source of great satisfaction in terms of the scholarly record and judicial record that you've spent a lifetime building. I want to start by asking you a question. Why is the First Amendment's protection of religious liberty, why is that important?
Well, I think it's broadly viewed that the framers protected and ratifiers protected the free exercise of religion because, for reasons that we all know from history of persecuted religious minorities fleeing to the United States, that enshrining that protection, it was one of the Bill of Rights because it was considered so fundamental.
And why does that matter to Americans? What difference does that make in anybody's life?
Well, I think all of the Bill of Rights, each and every one of them, is important to Americans because we value the Constitution, including religious liberty.
Well, how about the free speech protections of the First Amendment? Why are those important?
So that minority viewpoints can't be squashed, so that it's not just the majority that can speak popular views. You don't really need the First Amendment if what you're saying is something that everybody wants to hear. You need it when people are trying to silence you.
And how about the Second Amendment? Why is the right to keep and bear arms important?
Well, we talked about Heller earlier this morning, and what Heller tells us is that the Second Amendment protects an individual right to bear arms for self-defense.
Well, I think all of those rights, and I agree with you, the entire Bill of Rights is incredibly important to Americans. I also think what is really striking about this hearing today and also yesterday is that Senate Democrats are not defending what I think is really a radical agenda that they have when it comes to the Bill of Rights. And the topics they're discussing today have little bearing to the rights that are really at issue and in jeopardy at the Supreme Court. And so let's take a few minutes to go through them. First of all, we've had some discussion of Roe versus Wade. You have declined to give an opinion on a matter that might be pending before the court. That is, of course, the same answer that every single sitting justice has given when he or she was sitting in the same chair you are. It is mandated by the judicial canons of ethics. Whether one is a nominee of a Democratic president or a Republican president, that has been the answer that has been given to this committee for decades. But I do think it is interesting that our Democratic colleagues, number one, don't discuss what would actually happen if there came a day in which Roe versus Wade were overruled, which is namely that it would not suddenly become the case that abortion was illegal, but rather it would revert to the status of the law as it's been for nearly 200 years of our nation's history. And it is difficult to dispute that there are a great many jurisdictions, including jurisdictions like California and New York, who even if Roe versus Wade were no longer the law of the land, their elected legislatures would almost certainly continue unrestricted access to abortion with virtually no limitation. What I find interesting, though, is that our Democratic colleagues do not discuss what is really the radical position of the most liberal justices on the Supreme Court, which is that no restrictions whatsoever are permissible when it comes to abortion. Yesterday, one of the Democratic senators made reference to the case Gonzalez versus Carhart. I'm quite familiar with that case, and I represented Texas and a number of other states as amici in that case. That case concerned the constitutionality of the federal ban on partial birth abortion. That was legislation that passed Congress, was signed into law, that made the really gruesome practice of partial birth abortion illegal. Overwhelming majority of Americans believe partial birth abortion should be prohibited, even those who identify as pro-choice. A significant percentage.
Television was, there is a conspiracy of great money to basically hijack this country, to hijack the democratic process. And he just laid this out. Sheldon Whitehouse, the Democrat from Rhode Island, one of the absolute most brilliant, and not just intellectually, but he knows how to make a presentation. He knows how to build a case. One of the most brilliant senators on this panel, just laid it out. there is a group of right-wing billionaires and foundations associated with them. They have created a blind trust or a front organization that they route their money through called Donors Trust that is constructed in such a way that we never learn who it is who actually gave them money. Over $250 million have flowed through this channel, and the money is, we don't know where it's coming from, although yesterday the Washington Post, I believe, perhaps it was the New York Times, had a front page story about Charles Koch is finally getting the Supreme Court he wants. Charles Koch, one of the richest men in America. He's worth probably close to $100 billion and has been funding right-wing causes since the 60s, as far as we can tell. Certainly his daddy was before that with the John Birch Society. That $250 million has flowed into these various organizations. And one of these organizations, the Federalist Society and Leonard Leo, have been huge recipients, tens of millions of dollars of this money. And they have been picking and nurturing hardcore right-wing judges literally out of college, out of law school, and training them up in the way of becoming a hardcore right-wing judge and getting them appointments on the bench. Amy Coney Barrett had just been a lawyer who was signing full-page newspaper ads to end abortion and end, and respect life from fertilization forward, which basically means, in their minds, they're opposed to the birth control pill. Even though, the birth control pill typically interrupts the cycle before fertilization occurs. They've got this extensive mythology about that, that has resulted in anti-birth control legislation being proposed by these same people, by Republicans, largely being influenced by either Catholics or evangelical Protestants who have bought this idea that at the moment of conception, that's when God decides that life is going to happen. And he just laid this all out, that all this money is coming from these dark interests. And part of this money is to continue the process. It's to support the Citizens United decision that made all this dark money possible, that blew up all the good government laws that we had after the Nixon bribery scandals, many of which were passed during the Republican Jerry Ford presidency in 1974. So, here we are, and 5 and 6, right up to the Buckley decision in 76. I was surprised, frankly, he didn't mention Buckley, but, hey, I'm a Supreme Court wonk. But he just did this absolutely brilliant job of laying this out, of just putting it right out there and saying, here's what's going on. This is what Hillary Clinton referred to 20 years ago as the vast right-wing conspiracy. You've got a bunch of right-wing billionaires. These are the people that Franklin Roosevelt took down. He called them the economic royalists. He said, they hate me and I welcome their hatred. He challenged them on every front. He beat them so badly that they stopped engaging in politics right up until 1971, when Lewis Powell wrote his infamous memo. The next year, Richard Nixon put him on the Supreme Court. And within 4 years, in the Buckley decision, he was saying, oh, it's fine if billionaires own politicians. That's called free speech. So Sheldon Whitehouse laid all this out and basically said, what we're watching here is a conspiracy to pack the courts with hardcore right-wingers who don't believe in democracy, don't believe that the government has any kind of protective function with regard to the people, and don't believe that the people have rights unless the government says they have rights. For example, the right to an abortion. Or the right to get married if you're not, a straight cis person. This is what, Sheldon Whitehouse laid out, and absolutely, and he pointed out, there have been 80 5-4 decisions where the court has ruled against we the people in every single one of these 80 decisions, and every single one of them was 5-4 Republicans versus Democratic appointees. Every single one of them, and every single one of them had been heavily supported. In fact, the cases have been brought before the court by this $250 million dark money machine. We'll be back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Senator Ted Cruz right now is doing his best to redefine unctuous and smarmy. Let's check that out.
Emilita. Is it your position under your theory of the case that the federal government can ban books? And the Obama Justice Department responded, yes. Yes, it is our position that if the books criticize a political candidate, a politician, the federal government can ban books. As far as I'm concerned, that is a terrifying view of the First Amendment. Citizens United was decided 5-4. By a narrow 5-4 majority, the Supreme Court concluded the First Amendment did not allow the federal government to punish you for making a movie critical of a politician. And likewise, that the federal government couldn't ban books. 4 justices dissented. 4 justices were willing to say the federal government can ban books and can ban movies and presumably could ban books as well. When Hillary Clinton was running for president, she explicitly promised every justice she nominated to the court would pledge to overturn Citizens United. By the way, Hillary Clinton said she would demand of her nominee something you have rightly said that this administration has not demanded of you, which is a commitment on any case as to how you will rule. Democrats have shown no compunction in expecting their nominees to make a promise. Here's how I'm going to vote on a pending case. Judicial ethics be damned. Or how about the Second Amendment? We've heard some reference to the Heller decision. Senator from Connecticut yesterday talked about reasonable gun control and gun safety provisions. Well, that, of course, was not what was at stake in the Heller decision. Number one, majority decision in Heller, Justice Scalia's opinion, acknowledges reasonable provisions, things like prohibitions on felons in possession are permissible. Your opinion in the Cantor decision likewise acknowledged that restrictions preventing dangerous criminals from receiving firearms are entirely consistent and permissible under the Second Amendment. But the issue at Heller was much more fundamental. It was whether the Second Amendment protects an individual right to keep and bear arms at all. The vote in Heller was 5-4. By a vote of 5-4, the majority struck down the District of Columbia's total prohibitions on owning an operative firearm in the District of Columbia. The argument of the 4 dissenters was not what our Democratic colleagues talk about here. It wasn't some reasonable gun control provisions are okay. That was not the argument of the dissenters. That question we can actually have a reasonable debate on. Reasonable minds can differ on what the appropriate line should be, what are reasonable laws there, but that was not what was at issue at Heller. The position of the 4 dissenters was the Second Amendment protects no individual right to keep and bear arms whatsoever, but merely a, quote, collective right of the militia, which is fancy lawyer talk for a non-existent right. 4 justices would have ruled that way, 1 vote away. The consequences of the court concluding that there is no individual right under the First Amendment would mean you and I and every American watching this would lose your Second Amendment right. It would mean the federal government, the state government, the city could ban guns entirely, could make it a criminal offense for any one of us to own a firearm. And no individual American would have any judicially cognizable right to challenge. That is a radical reading of the Constitution. That is effectively erasing the Second Amendment from the Bill of Rights. And Hillary Clinton likewise promised in 2016 that every justice she nominated would commit to voting to overturn Heller. They were big on litmus tests. And Joe Biden, although he refuses to answer just about anything, about whether or not he's going to pack the court, he did tell the American people the voters don't deserve to know whether he's going to pack the court. Truly a statement of disrespect and contempt for the voters. Unusual in our political process. One vote away from the Second Amendment being erased from the Bill of Rights. None of our Democratic colleagues admit that that is their agenda, and yet those are the justices that Democratic presidential nominees are promising they will appoint. Justices who will take away your right to criticize politicians, justices who will allow censorship, justices who will allow movies and books to be banned, justices who will erase the Second Amendment from the Bill of Rights. And how about religious liberty? Religious liberty is an issue near and dear to a great many of them. The right of every American to live according to your faith, according to your conscience, whatever that faith may be. Religious liberty is fundamentally about diversity. It's about respecting diversity, that whatever your faith tradition might be, the government is not going to trample on it. Religious liberty cases over and over again have been decided 5-4. The case of Van Orden versus Perry, a case I litigated, dealt with the Ten Commandments monument that stands on the state capitol grounds. It's been there since 1961 in Texas. An individual plaintiff, an atheist, a homeless man, filed a lawsuit seeking to tear down the Ten Commandments. The case went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. It was decided 5-4. 4 justices were willing to say, in effect, send in the bulldozers and tear down that monument, because you can't gaze on the image of the Ten Commandments on public land. Another case, the Mojave Desert Veterans Memorial. This is a memorial erected to the men and women who gave their lives in World War I. It's a lone white Latin cross, simple and bare in the middle of the desert. I've been there on Sunrise Rock where it stands. The ACLU filed a lawsuit saying you cannot gaze on the image of a cross on public land, and the ACLU won in the district court. They won in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. The federal courts ordered that Veterans Memorial to be covered up with a burlap sack with a chain on the bottom, and then a plywood box. When the case went to the U.S. Supreme Court, I represented 3 million veterans pro bono for free, defending that Veterans Memorial. We won 5-4, and there were 4 justices prepared to say, tear down the Veterans Memorial, and under the reasoning that they put forth, they were not far away from saying, bring out the chisel and remove the crosses and the stars of David on the tombstones of the men and women that gave their lives at Arlington Cemetery defending this nation. That is a radical view, and we're 1 vote away. That is utterly contrary to the text of the First Amendment, to the understanding of the First Amendment. When we argued the Ten Commandments case in the U.S. Supreme Court, there was more than a little bit of irony. And that, do you know how many times the image of the Ten Commandments appears in the courtroom of the Supreme Court? The answer to that is 43. There are 2 images of the Ten Commandments carved on the wooden doors as you walk out of the courtroom. You will soon be sitting looking at them. There are 40 images of the Ten Commandments on the bronze gates on both sides of the courtroom. And then, Judge Barrett, when you're sitting at the bench, above your left shoulder will be a frieze you know well, a frieze carved into the wall of great lawgivers, one of whom is Moses. He is standing there holding the Ten Commandments, the text of which is legible in Hebrew, as he looks down upon the justices, and 4 justices were willing to say, in effect, bring out the sandblasters, because we must remove God from the public square. That is a profound threat to our religious liberty, and I would note that it doesn't just extend to public acknowledgement. It also extends to religious liberty. The Little Sisters of the Poor, our Catholic convent of nuns who take oaths of poverty, who devote their lives to caring for the sick, caring for the needy, caring for the elderly. The Obama administration litigated against the Little Sisters of the Poor, seeking to fine them in order to force them to pay for abortion-inducing drugs, among others. Truly a stunning situation when you have the federal government litigating against nuns. Supreme Court decided the Hobby Lobby case, another case routinely denounced by Senate Democrats. The Hobby Lobby case concluded that the federal government could not permissibly force a Christian business to violate their faith. It reflected the religious liberty traditions of our country, that you can live according to your faith without the government trampling on it. You know what this body did, I'm sorry to say? Senate Democrats introduced legislation to gut the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. Religious Freedom Restoration Act, when it passed this body, passed with an overwhelming bipartisan majority. Senate Democrats, including Chuck Schumer and Joe Biden and Ted Kennedy, all voted for the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. Democratic President Bill Clinton signed the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. And yet, in the wake of the Hobby Lobby decision, this body voted on legislation to just gut the protections for religious liberty. And I'm sorry to say, every single Senate Democrat voted to do so. Not a single one, zero, would defend religious liberty. Joe Biden has already pledged, if he's elected, he plans to initiate again the attack on the Little Sisters of the Poor. You know, it's interesting, folks in the press like to talk about Pope Francis. And on some issues, Pope Francis has been vocal when it comes to the environment, when it comes to issues concerning immigration. The Pope has been vocal on issues that our Democratic colleagues like and agree with. The press is happy to amplify those views. Somehow missing from that amplification is acknowledgement that when the Pope came to the United States in Washington, he went and visited the Little Sisters of the Poor. Here in D.C., he went to their home here in D.C., and the Vatican explained he did so because he wanted to highlight their cause. That the federal government shouldn't be persecuting nuns for living according to their faith. That's what's at stake in these nominations. And you won't hear any of that from the Senate Democrats on this committee. That's why their base is so angry at your nomination, Judge Barrett, because they don't believe you are going to join the radical effort to erase those fundamental rights from the Bill of Rights. I believe that issue, preserving the Constitution, preserving the Bill of Rights, our fundamental liberties, I believe is the most important issue facing the country in the November election. And I think for those of us who value those rights, we should take solace in the fact that not a single Democrat is willing even to acknowledge the radical sweep of their agenda, much less defend it. They know it's wildly unpopular. And look, right at the heart of this is a decision many Democrats have made to abandon democracy. You see, most policies like Obamacare, policies like health care, most policies under our constitutional system are meant to be decided by democratically elected legislatures. Why? So they can be accountable to the people. So if the voters disagree, they can throw the bums out. But too many Democrats have decided today that democracy is too complicated. It's too hard to actually convince your fellow Americans of the merits of your position. It's much easier just to give it to the court. Find 5 lawyers in black robes and let them decree the policy outcome you want, which makes your radical base happy, presumably makes the millions, if not billions, in dark money being spent for Democrats happy. without actually having to justify it to the American people. Judge Barrett, I'm not going to ask you to respond to any of that. But I do want to shift to a different topic, which is a bit more about you personally, your background. Judge Barrett, do you speak any foreign languages?
Once upon a time, I could speak French, but I have fallen woefully out of practice, so please don't ask me to do that right now.
You can be assured of that, because I had 2 years of high school French, and I suspect yours remains much better than mine. How about music? Do you play any instruments?
The piano.
Do you? How long have you played the piano?
Well, I played the piano growing up for 10 years, and now most of my piano playing consists of playing my children's songs for them and supervising their own piano practice. I look forward one day when I have more time to be able to do some of my own music.
Now, do the kids do piano lessons as well?
The kids do piano lessons. Some of the older ones who are in high school have gotten so busy with sports and those things that they've stopped, but the younger children do.
Our girls are 9 and 12, and they both do piano lessons, and I will say, at least in our household, it is less than voluntary. One of the things Heidi and I found, particularly the last 6 months during COVID, which has been an extraordinary crisis, is just with 2 kids at home, that doing distance learning when schools were shut down was really hard for us with 2 children. For you and your husband, you've got 7 kids. How did y'all manage through the lockdowns and distance learning? What was that like in the Barrett household?
Well, it was a challenging time, as it was for every American. Our oldest daughter, Emma, who's in college, moved home at that point because she's at Notre Dame. It closed. So Emma obviously could manage her own e-learning, and our high school age children, Tess and Vivian, could too. But Jesse and I just tried to take a divide and conquer approach for the younger 4. And yeah, it was quite challenging, I assure you.
One part of your story that I find particularly remarkable and that I admire is the decision you made to adopt 2 children. You and your husband had 5 biological children, and you adopted 2 more. Both of your adopted children are from Haiti. Haiti is a country that has some of the most crushing poverty in the world. My brother-in-law is a missionary in Haiti, and actually Heidi and the girls just got back from Haiti a couple of weeks ago. I was curious if you would share with this committee and with the American people what led you and your husband to make the decision to adopt. It's I think, one of the most loving and compassionate decisions any family can make.
Who have special needs. And then we also met another couple who had adopted a few children internationally. And we decided at that point, while we were engaged, that at some point in the future, we wanted to do that ourselves. And I guess we had imagined initially that we would have whatever biological kids that we had decided to have and then adopt at the end. But after we had our first daughter, Emma, we thought, well, why wait? So I was expecting Tess when we went and got Vivian. So she and Tess function, we call them our fraternal twins. They're in the same grade. And it really has enriched our family immeasurably. And, once we had adopted Vivian, at that point, then we made the decision that we definitely wanted to adopt again. And so several years later, John Peter entered our family.
So your children have been wonderfully well behaved. I think you're an amazing role model for little girls. What advice would you give little girls?
Well, what I'm saying is not designed. My brother now has left. I was just thinking of what my dad told me before the spelling bee about anything boys can do, girls can do better. And since my sons are sitting behind me, I will also say, but boys are great too.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Welcome again, Judge. Since I have the draw to always follow Senator Cruz, I did want to make one thing clear. after listening to that for a half hour, that Joe Biden is Catholic and he is a man of faith. And then I want to turn to something else, and that is that we need a reset here, in my mind, for the people at home, a bit of a reality check that this isn't normal right now. We have to understand that what people are dealing with, that 7.7 million people have gotten this virus, that 214,000 Americans have died. And for people watching at home and wondering what we're all doing in this room right now, and maybe you're home because you lost your job, or maybe you got your kids crawling all over your couch right now. Maybe you're trying to teach your first grader how to do a mute button to go to school. Or maybe you've got a small business that you had to close down or that's struggling. We should be doing something else right now. We shouldn't be doing that. We should be passing coronavirus relief like the House just did, which was a significant bill that would have been a big help. And I think people have to know that right now. And whether you're Democrat, Independent, or Republican. And that's why I started out yesterday by telling people that they need to vote. Number two, some of my colleagues throughout this hearing on the other side have been kind of portraying the job that the judge is before us on as being some kind of ivory tower exercise. I think one of my friends called it related that you'd be dealing with the dormant commerce clause. Well, I'm sure that might be true, but we also know that this is the highest court in the land, that the decisions of this court have a real impact on people. And I appreciated, Judge, that you said that you didn't want to be a queen. I actually wouldn't mind being a queen around here, the truth be known. I wouldn't mind doing it, and kind of a benevolent queen and making decisions so we could get things done. But you said you wouldn't let your views influence you and the like. But the truth is, the Supreme Court rulings, they rule people's lives. They decide if people can get married. They decide what schools they can go to. They decide if they could even have access to contraception. All of these things matter. So I want to make that clear. And the third reset here that I think we need to have is that this hearing is not normal. It is a sham. It is a rush to put in a justice. The last time that we had a vacancy so close to an election was when Abraham Lincoln was president. And he made the wise decision to wait until after the election. The last time we lost a justice so close to an election. That's what he did. Today, we are 21 days from the election. People are voting. Millions of people have already cast their ballots. And I go to the words of Senator McConnell. The last time we had a situation in election year, he said, the American people should have a voice in the selection of their next Supreme Court justice. Therefore, this vacancy should not be filled until we have a new president. That set the precedent that so many of you have embraced, or at least you did a few years ago, and that is that in an election year, the people choose the president, and then the president nominates the justice. So why is this happening? Well, that's a good question. This guy, our president, he is the one that decided to plop a Supreme Court nomination in the middle of an election when people's health care is on the line with a case before the court on November 10th. So let's see what he said about the Supreme Court. Well, one of President Trump's campaign promises in 2015 was that his judicial appointments will do the right thing on Obamacare. You can see it right here. And in fact, Judge, just one day after you were nominated, this is like a few weeks ago, he said also on Twitter that it would be a big win if the Supreme Court strikes down the health law. So, Judge, my first question, do you think we should take the president at his word when he says his nominee will do the right thing and overturn the Affordable Care Act?
Senator Klobuchar, I can't really speak to what the president has said on Twitter. He hasn't said any of that to me. And what I can tell you, as I have told your colleagues earlier today, is that no one has elicited from me any commitment in a case or even brought up a commitment in the case. I am 100% committed to judicial independence from political pressure. So whatever people's, party platforms may be or campaign promises may be, the reason why judges have life tenure is to insulate them from those pressures. So I take my oath seriously to follow the law. And, I am not pre-committed, nor would I pre-commit to decide a case any particular way.
Okay. And I think this life tenure, this idea that you have, just for everyone out there, a job for life, makes this even more important for us to consider where you might be. And I know you have not said how you would rule on this case that's coming up right after the election, where the president had said it would be a big win if the Supreme Court strikes down the law. But you have directly criticized Justice Roberts in an article in my own state in one of the Minnesota Law School journals. It was in 2017. It was the same year you became a judge. And when Roberts writes the opinion to uphold the Affordable Care Act, you said he, quote, pushed the Affordable Care Act beyond its plausible meaning to save the statute. Is that correct?
Senator Klobuchar, I just want to clarify, is this the constitutional commentary publication that you and I discussed?
Yes, it is. It is, but it's still a University of Minnesota. Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to be sure because I hadn't published in the Minnesota Law Review.
Again, did you ask that question? Did you say that he pushed the Affordable Care Act beyond its plausible meaning to save the statute?
One thing I want to clarify is you said that I criticized, Chief Justice Roberts, and I don't attack people, just ideas. So that was just designed to make a comment about his reasoning in that case, which as I've said before, is consistent with the way the majority opinion characterized it as the less plausible reading of the statute.
So you didn't agree with his reasoning in the case that upheld the Affordable Care Act?
What I said, and was this King versus Burwell or NFIB versus Sebelius?
That was NFIB versus Sebelius. I'll get to King versus Burwell in a second.
Okay. What I said with respect to NFIB versus Sebelius is that the interpretation that the majority adopted, construing the mandate to be a tax rather than a penalty, was not the most natural reading of the statute.
It was still the reading that Justice Roberts got to. Now, you also criticized, as you pointed out by bringing up King v. Burwell, another case where the court ruled in favor of the health law. This was in a 2015 National Public Radio interview. And you acknowledged that the result of people being able to keep their subsidies under the Affordable Care Act would help millions of Americans. Yet you praised the dissent by Justice Scalia, saying the dissent had, quote, the better of the legal argument. Is that correct?
I did say that, yes.
Okay, so then would you have ruled the same way and voted with Justice Scalia?
Well, Senator Klobuchar, one of the plus sides or the upsides of being an academic is that you can speak for yourself, that a professor professes and can opine, but it's very different than the judicial decision-making process. So it's difficult for me to say how I would have decided that case if I had to go through the whole process of judicial decision-making that I was describing this morning. Now, having been a judge for 3 years, I can say I appreciate greatly the distinctions between academic writing or academic speaking and judicial decision-making, such that a judge might look at an academic and say, easy for you to say, because you're not on a multi-member court. You're not constrained by stare decisis. You don't have real parties in front of you, consulting with litigants, consulting with your clerks. Yes. It's just a different process.
I viewed this one so interestingly because you were commenting on the public policy results, which you and my colleagues on the Republican side have said this shouldn't be about public policy. And you said, okay, that's okay. But then you were really clear on your legal outcome in terms of your view of whose side you were on. You were on Scalia's side. And of course, that was a side to not uphold the Affordable Care Act, which would have been kicked millions of people off their health care in effect because they would have lost their subsidies. And I just see this as interesting because of this kind of dichotomy they're trying to make between policy and legal. And my view is that legal decisions affect policy. I mean, I'm looking at people in my state that'll deal with this if the Affordable Care Act is struck down. Elijah from St. Paul, who was born with cerebral palsy. Because of the Affordable Care Act, he is now 16 and is a proud Boy Scout. Casey, whose brother lives in Alexandria, and he has chronic kidney failure, and he needs a transplant. Without the ACA, that'd be that. Or Burnett from the suburbs of St. Paul, whose daughter has multiple sclerosis, depends on benefits under the ACA. Liliana of Fridley, who has a 21-year-old son with autism and needs her children to be able to stay on her insurance until she's 26. Melanie, a senior from Duluth, who's being treated for ovarian cancer and needs access to the Affordable Care Act. So my point is that these are real-world situations. And so I get that you're not saying how you'd rule on these cases. So what does that leave us with here to try to figure out what kind of judge you would be? And I was thinking last night of when I was growing up, we would go up to northern Minnesota, and we didn't have a cabin, but we had friends that did. And we would go on these walks in the woods with my mom, and she loved to show all the tracks on that path, whether they were deer tracks, and she'd have us figure out what they were, or elk, or maybe even a bear. And we would follow these tracks down that path. And you'd always think, is there going to be a deer around the corner that we're going to see? And very rarely was there one. But we would follow the tracks. And so when I look at your record, I just keep following the track. That's what I've got to do. And so when I follow the track, this is what I see. You consider Justice Scalia one of the most conservative judges in the history of the Supreme Court as your mentor. You criticize the decision written by Justice Roberts upholding the Affordable Care Act. That is, to me, one big track. Even if you didn't consider yourself criticizing him personally, you criticized the reasoning. You then said in another case about the Affordable Care Act that you liked the legal reasoning, that he had the better legal argument, that Justice Scalia had the better legal argument. You have signed your name to a public statement featured in an ad, a paid ad, that called for an end to what the ad called the barbaric legacy of Roe v. Wade, which ran on the anniversary of the 1973 Supreme Court decision. You disagreed with long-standing precedent on gun safety, which said that felons shouldn't be able to get guns, something that was pretty important to me when I had my old job in law enforcement. This is something that Senator Durbin asked you about. You suggested that you agree with the dissent in the marriage equality case, Obergefell, that it wasn't the role of the court to decide that same-sex couples had the right to be married. I think this was in a lecture you gave where you said the dissent's view was that it wasn't for the court to decide. People could lobby in state legislatures. And all this takes me to one point as I follow those tracks down that path. And it takes me to this point where I believe, and I think the American people have to understand, that you would be the polar opposite of Justice Ginsburg. She and Justice Scalia were friends, yes, but she never embraced his legal philosophy. So that is what concerns me. And I want to turn to an area where I think Justice Ginsburg, whose seat we are considering you for, was truly a hero. And that was the area of voting rights. And that was the area of election. I think that, what did the president say here? He said, September 23rd, 2020, I think this, he means the election, will end up in the Supreme Court. And I think it's very important that we have 9 justices. I don't think how much clearer we can be. And as I said yesterday, I do not for a minute concede that this election is going to end up in the Supreme Court, because people are voting in droves as we speak. But that is what is on the mind of the man who nominated you for this job. Then he said on September 29th of 2020, I think I'm counting on them, he meant the court, to look at the ballot indefinitely. So I know you said earlier in questions from Senator Leahy that you are not going to commit to whether or not you are going to recuse yourself for any kind of an election case. But I do want to point out that as the president has said these things, and as he has nominated you, that people are voting right now. They are voting, as I said, in droves. You know how many states or people are voting right now, Judge? I think one of my colleagues said it.
I don't know.
It's more than 40 states. People are voting right now as we speak. I think something like 9 million votes have been cast. Do you think it is faithful to our democratic principles to fill a Supreme Court vacancy this close to an election when people are still voting?
Senator Klobuchar, I think that is a question for the political branches.
Okay. That's your right to answer in that way. Beyond this immediate election, I want to turn to the Supreme Court's critical role when it comes to the right to vote, this area where Justice Ginsburg was such a champion. Senator Durbin went over your dissent at length in Cantor v. Barr, where you drew a distinction between individual rights and civic rights. And you wrote that historically, felons should be disqualified from exercising certain rights, like the right to vote and to serve on juries. So my question is this next line where you said, these rights belonged only to virtuous citizens. What does that mean?
Senator, I would need to look at the article to clarify, but as I'm sitting here, I don't think I said felons should lose voting rights. I think what I was talking about is that 14th Amendment. Yeah, that.
But it wasn't an article, just to be clear, right? This is your dissent.
Oh, my dissent.
Yeah, I think it's your dissent in Cantor v.
Yes, you're right.
And it says felons could be disqualified from exercising certain rights, like the rights to vote and serve on juries. But apart from that clause, you said these rights belong only to virtuous citizens. That's what I'm trying to understand what that means.
So the argument in the case, those who were challenging Heller and those who are arguing on the side of the government in the Cantor case is that the Second Amendment is a civic right. And that is how the Supreme Court itself framed the debate as a distinction between civic rights and individual rights, with voting being a civic right. And in literature, in the historical literature, which was at play in that case.
Okay, but how would you define the word virtuous? Because it doesn't appear in the Constitution.
Well, Senator,
I'm just trying to know what that means, because we're living at a time where a lot of people are having their voting rights taken away from them. So what's virtuous?
Okay, well, Senator, I want to be clear that is not, in the opinion, designed to denigrate the right to vote, which is fundamental. The distinction between civic and individual rights is one that's present in the court's decisions, and it has to do with a kind of a jurisprudential view of what rights are. And the virtuous citizenry idea is a historical and jurisprudential one. It certainly does not mean that I think that anybody gets a measure of virtue and whether they're good or not and whether they're allowed to vote. That's not what I said.
Okay, now let me ask you this in a different way, because now let's go to the real world here. So in Justice Ginsburg's dissent in Shelby, where a 5-4 court struck down a key provision of the Voting Rights Act, she described the right to vote as a fundamental right in our democratic system. And I assume you agree with it, because you just said that. Let's not get to her dissent. You agree with the concept that it's a fundamental right, because you just.
As I just said, yeah, the court has repeatedly said it was
okay, so she also wrote in her dissent that the Constitution uses the words right to vote in 5 separate places, the 14th, 15th, 19th, 24th, and 26th Amendments. Each of these amendments, this is still her talking, not me, each of these amendments contains the same broad empowerment of Congress to enact appropriate legislation to enforce the protected right. The implication is unmistakable. Under our constitutional structure, Congress holds the lead rein in making the right to vote equally real for all U.S. citizens. Do you agree with Justice Ginsburg's conclusion that the Constitution clearly empowers Congress to protect the right to vote?
Well, Senator, that would be eliciting an opinion from me on whether the dissent or the majority was right in Shelby County, and I can't express a view on that, as I've said, because it would be inconsistent with the judicial rule.
Okay, so here's my problem. So you go out of your way in the case that Dick Durbin was discussing to make this distinction between voting rights and gun rights, but now you won't say whether or not you agree with Ginsburg. And so my view is just based, again, following those facts on this case, that you are most likely with the majority, but I know you're not going to answer this. But what I do want you to know is this, and this is where it gets interesting because of what Justice Ginsburg predicted in that dissent. According to the Brennan Center, over 20 states since that case came out that withdrew, that took away part of the protections from the Voting Rights Act, over 20 states have now made more restrictive voting laws than they did before that case. Doesn't that suggest to you that Justice Ginsburg had the better of the argument when she wrote that throwing out pre-clearance when it has worked and is continuing to work to stop discriminatory changes is like throwing away your umbrella in a rainstorm because you are not getting wet? Do you think that that's true? And I mean, it seems to me that the proof is in the pudding. Like basically, this rainstorm that she said would come has come with all these states, including a number of them that my colleagues over there represent, have enacted stricter laws. Has it happened?
Senator Klobuchar, I want to clarify, you said I was answering Senator Durbin's questions about the Second Amendment, but refusing to answer yours. And so I just wanted to clarify that I have written Cantor versus Barr, and so that's why I was talking about it. But since I didn't write Shelby, I can't really talk about it. So anything that I've written about or talked about, I would be happy to answer your questions.
Okay. All right. But again, it just seems to me you are out of your way on that case. And this is a case that is so real for so many people right now. And that while you can say it's a fundamental right, the issue is that this case and the Voting Rights Act are so key. And let me just say why. We're talking about the entire foundation of our democracy here. For centuries, Americans have fought and died to protect the right to vote. And so what matters is not just what you say about its being fundamental, it's what you do. States like South Carolina, Texas, North Carolina, Louisiana, Tennessee have policies that make it harder for people to vote. And it's a real world thing before the Supreme Court. In fact, back in May, when voters in Wisconsin were standing in line in the middle of a pandemic, in homemade masks, in garbage bags, in the middle of a rainstorm, just to exercise their right to vote, 70 of them got COVID because we didn't know enough about it back then because the president hadn't told us what he knew, and we didn't know enough to protect those voters. So it ends up at the Supreme Court. What did Justice Ginsburg do? When the Republican-appointed majority on the court ruled that voters in Wisconsin could not have more time to get their ballots in during the pandemic, she called them out in her dissent, in her blueprint for the future. And she said the majority opinion boggled the mind. So what boggles my mind? Well, 2 weeks ago, the U.S. Supreme Court reinstated the South Carolina requirement that mail-in ballots must have witness signatures. In the middle of a pandemic, you got to go and get a witness. In Texas, Republicans have argued that the pandemic wasn't a good enough reason to let people under age 65 vote by mail, despite the fact that over 42,000 Americans under 65 have died from COVID. And the governor right now is forcing that state to have only one ballot box per county, including in Harris County, where there are 4.7 million people. And for those of you that thought a judge took care of it a few days ago, he did. But then yesterday, 3 Trump-appointed judges came in and reversed that. So we're back to one ballot box for people to drop their ballots off in a county of 4.7 million people. In Tennessee, Republicans have tried to prevent ballot drop boxes. I know we had the Secretary of State as one of our witnesses at a Rules Committee hearing, and they have argued in court that COVID-19 is not a valid excuse to vote by mail. In North Carolina, the Supreme Court struck down a core component of the Voting Rights Act, what happened? Well, states like North Carolina passed laws that were so egregious to make it harder to vote that the Fourth Circuit struck down their law and noted that it targeted African Americans with almost surgical precision. So that is what the stakes are. And that is why not having Justice Ginsburg on the court right now is so frightening to so many Americans out there. And that is why we are asking you these questions about voting. So let me turn to another election question, gerrymandering. In 2015, Justice Ginsburg wrote the majority opinion in Arizona State Legislature for the Arizona Independent Redistricting Commission, holding that it was constitutional for the people of Arizona to amend the state constitution to establish an independent redistricting commission. Because of this case and Justice Ginsburg's opinion, many argue now that Arizona has fairer electoral maps. The decision was 5-4. Here's your example. And now Justice Ginsburg and Justice Kennedy are no longer on the court. My question is this: must state legislatures abide by their own state's constitution when exercising their authority under the Elections Clause?
Senator Klobuchar, that would be eliciting an opinion from me about whether I agreed or disagreed with the result in that case.
Okay, is it constitutional for voters to amend a state constitution to establish specific processes for elections, like the voters in Arizona did to stop gerrymandering?
Again, you're asking me for a view on that particular case, and Justice Ginsburg herself gave the most famous articulation of the principle that constrains me from doing so, which is no hints, forecasts, or previews. So I can't express a view on precedent or on how I would decide any question that was provoked by the application of that precedent to a later case.
Okay, last week a contractor from outside of my state of Minnesota started recruiting poll watchers with special forces experience to protect polling locations in my state. This was clear voter intimidation. Similar efforts are going on around the country, solicited by President Trump's false claims of massive voter fraud, something that, by the way, many Republican leaders, including Michael Steele, the former head of the Republican Party, including Tom Ridge, including Governor Kasich, including sitting Senator Romney, have made very clear is not true. So as a result of his claims, people are trying to get poll watchers, special forces people, to go to the polls. Judge Barrett, under federal law, is it illegal to intimidate voters at the poll?
Senator Klobuchar, I can't characterize the facts in a hypothetical situation, and I can't apply the law to a hypothetical set of facts. I can only decide cases as they come to me, litigated by parties on a full record after fully engaging precedent, talking to colleagues, writing an opinion. And so I can't answer questions like that.
Okay, well, I'll make it easier. 18 USC 594 outlaws anyone who intimidates, threatens, coerces, or attempts to intimidate, threaten, or coerce any other person for the purpose of interfering with the right of such other person to vote. This is a law that has been on the books for decades. Do you think a reasonable person would feel intimidated by the presence of armed civilian groups at the polls?
Senator Klobuchar, that is eliciting, I'm not sure whether to say it's eliciting a legal opinion from me, because the reasonable person standard, as you know, is one common in the law, or just an opinion as a citizen, but it's not something really that's appropriate for me to comment on.
Okay. Here's one that I think is a selection of electoral college electors. You know that each state has laws that dictate how electoral college electors are selected. Judge Barrett, in 1932, the Supreme Court in Smiley v. Home, a case involving my state, ruled that the Minnesota State Legislature could not change election rules unilaterally. Do you agree that the unanimous opinion in Smiley v. Home, which has never been questioned by any other Supreme Court case, is settled law?
I'll say two things about that. First of all, I was not aware of that case, so you've taught me something. Okay. But secondly, I can't comment on the precedent, give thumbs up or thumbs down in Justice Kagan's words.
Okay, well, why don't we end there with precedent? I think that's a good way to end here. So You wrote in your 2013 Texas Law Review article that you tend to agree with the view that when a justice's best understanding of the Constitution conflicts with Supreme Court precedent or case law, it is, quote, more legitimate for her to follow her preferred view rather than apply the precedent. And I want to run through a few examples. So Brown v. Board of Education, as we know, that holds that the 14th Amendment prohibits states from segregating schools on the basis of race. So is that precedent?
But yes.
That can't be overruled.
Well, that is precedent. And as I think I said in that same article, it's super precedent. People consider it to be on that very small list of things that are so widely established and agreed upon by everyone. Calls for its overruling simply don't exist.
Okay. Well, you also separately acknowledged that in Planned Parenthood v. Casey, the Supreme Court's controlling opinion talked about the reliance interest on Roe v. Wade, which it treated in that case as super precedent. Is Roe a super precedent?
How would you define super precedent?
I might have thought someday I'd be sitting in that chair. I'm not. I'm up here, so I'm asking you.
Okay, well, people use super precedent differently.
Okay.
The way that it's used in the scholarship and the way that I was using it in the article that you're reading from was to define cases that are so well settled that no political actors and no people seriously push for their overruling. And I'm answering a lot of questions about Roe, which I think indicates that Roe doesn't fall in that category. And scholars across the spectrum say that doesn't mean that Roe should be overruled, but descriptively, it does mean that it's not a case that everyone has accepted and doesn't call for its overruling.
Okay, so here's what's interesting to me. You said that Brown is, and I know my time is running out, is a super precedent. That's something the Supreme Court has not even said, but you have said that. So if you say that, why won't you say that about Roe v. Wade, a case that the court's controlling opinion in that Planned Parenthood v. Casey case has described as a super precedent? That's what I'm trying to figure out.
Well, Senator, I can just give you the same answer that I just did. I'm using a term in that article that is from the scholarly literature. It's actually one that was developed by scholars who are, certainly not conservative scholars who take a more progressive approach to the Constitution. And again, as Richard Fallon from Harvard said, Roe is not a super precedent because calls for its overruling have never ceased, but that doesn't mean that Roe should be overruled. It just means that it doesn't fall on the small handful of cases like Marbury versus Madison and Brown versus the board that no one questions anymore.
Is United States v. Virginia military, is that super precedent?
Senator Klobuchar, if you continue to ask questions about super precedents that aren't on the list of the super precedents that I discussed in the article that are well acknowledged in the constitutional law literature, every time you ask the question, I'll have to say that I can't grade it.
Okay. Well, I am then left with looking at the tracks of your record and where it leads the American people. And I think it leads us to a place that's going to have severe repercussions for them. Thank you.
Senator Satz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Judge, welcome back. I mean this as good news, but it might not feel like it after me. You're half done for today. I'm 11th of 22. Mr. Chairman, before I begin my questioning, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to admit into the record a letter from Alan Gelzo, the historian at Princeton, who has written a letter to the committee in response to some of Senator Harris's claims about the history of Supreme Court vacancies going back to the Civil War.
Without objection.
Thank you. Judge, you have said that the meaning of law doesn't change with time, and you've said that's very important. Can you unpack for us why it's so important that the meaning of a law doesn't change with time?
Sure, because the law stays the same until it is lawfully changed. And if we're talking about a law that has been enacted by the people's representatives, or gone through the process of constitutional amendment or constitutional ratification, it must go through the lawfully prescribed process before it's changed. So Article 5 in the context of the Constitution, or bicameralism and presentment in the context of statutes. And it's not up to judges to short circuit that process by updating the law. That's your job.
But laws clearly are written in a context, and then the things, the circumstances to which those laws have applied would change. Does the Fourth Amendment have nothing to say about cell phones, unreasonable search?
Was that it's those cases where there's no dispute. Nobody disputes that Brown v. Board was right. And so it's not it's a super precedent. And then the other example that she gave was 1803 Marbury versus Madison. Marbury versus Madison was the case where the Supreme Court took onto itself the power to strike down laws passed by Congress and signed by the president based on their interpretation of the Constitution. Now, there, to the best of my knowledge, have not been any cases brought before the Supreme Court asking them to take that power away from themselves. But I would argue that that is, and so I think you could call it a super precedent, but it still is something that should be examined, in my opinion. And in fact, I think Congress has handed way too much power, both to the executive branch and to the judiciary. So, number one. And number two, she said that, therefore, Roe v. Wade is not a super precedent because there's all kinds of efforts to overthrow Roe v. Wade, or overturn Roe v. Wade, which was basically just her way of saying, yeah, I've got this. Don't worry. We're going to nuke Roe v. Wade. We're going to nuke the Affordable Care Act. We're gonna stand up for the big banks and the billionaires who put $250 million into packing our court system over the last decade. I'm gonna stand up for all these billionaires and all these right wingers because that's the world I live in. That's what I believe in. That's what I think is right. It's crazy. And, here's Ben Sass is asking about originalism. I don't want to go back to it right now because we've all heard this stuff. It's just, so let's pick up a couple of phone calls here as we're watching. And the next time we have a Democrat asking questions, I'll go back to that because the Republican questions are so predictable. Phyllis in Bayfield, Wisconsin. Hey, Phyllis, what's on your mind? Phyllis, you are on the air.
Hi, is this Tom?
It is, and you are on the air, Phyllis.
Very nice to talk with you. I'm calling because I wanted to make a point that as an environmental educator and a worshiper of the earth, a living planet, that I had an abortion years ago, my choice, because I did not appreciate it.
Phyllis, your phone is breaking up really badly. I don't know what you can do about that, but I can't hear you. Yeah, it's not working. Phyllis, I'm sorry. I'm going to put you on hold. You can talk to Joyce, and you guys can figure out what's going on here. Timothy in Rawlinsville, Michigan. Hey, Timothy, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, it's Roseville.
Roseville. I'm sorry.
Yeah, the reason why I was calling, and I want a female congressman to ask the nominee, since she believes in abortion so much, what does she have to say about the president using stem cells to cure his corona?
Right, because it wasn't specifically stem cells. It turns out it was aborted fetal tissue that the drugs were tested on, rather than developing them out of stem cells. Although there are other medications that have been developed out of stem cells, but just to be super precise, sorry Timothy, but if I don't say it absolutely right, we just get slammed on Twitter and whatnot. But I think your point is really well taken. Trump is like the ultimate hypocrite. Yes, let's put somebody on the Supreme Court to ban abortion, but I'll take a drug from it.
Yeah, but that fetus had to come from somewhere.
Exactly. Yeah, well, it came from an abortion in this case, and we know that because that fetal stem line, cell line, has been around for quite a while, and came from an aborted fetus. So, what you're pointing out is the hypocrisy of the Republican Party and Donald Trump. Does that surprise you, Timothy?
No, that don't surprise me. It's just as long as he's selfish, as long as it help him out, then the hell with everybody else. All these people.
Yeah, that's Donald Trump's motto.
Yeah,
I think that's what it says in Latin on his family crest. To hell with everybody else. Only it's in Latin,
Yeah.
Thank you, Timothy. Thanks for the call. It's 27 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of the hearings. Judge Amy Coney Barrett is before the Supreme Court, the former handmaid, and answering questions, or not answering questions, actually, would be a better description. Having a love fest right now with Ben Sass. We'll continue right after this.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Stick around. It's going to get interesting.
Because one of the things that I think is really unhelpful for the American people when they see hearings like this over the last 20 years is there is an assumption that those of us who've advocated for you over the course of the last 3 years must be doing it because we know something about your policy views. And we've seen the beautiful mind conspiracy theory charts, for instance, that this is about specific outcomes that people want. What I want is to have a judge who doesn't want to take away the job of a legislature that's accountable to the people. What I want is to be sure that the two political branches that are accountable to the people because they can hire and fire us are the places where policy decisions are made. So what you're saying is in the legal academy, there are people who agree with you on originalism as a broad philosophical school and yet would come out very different places on the outcomes of particular policy decisions.
That is what I'm saying.
So on the Notre Dame law faculty, when you were up for the vacancy on the 7th Circuit 3 years ago, the Notre Dame law faculty, as I understand, the letter that we got from them here, had people unanimously recommend you across the faculty, and I would assume there's a pretty wide view of policy on the Notre Dame law faculty.
There is.
And so people can affirm that you know what the job of a judge is. You have the judicial temperament and modesty and humility about the calling. And they're comfortable with you, even though they don't think they might agree with every policy view that you have before you put on your robe.
I hope that is what people think of me because that's what I've always striven to do. And certainly in my time as a judge, my job, my boss is the rule of law, not imposing my policy preferences.
So can you tell us what the black robe is about? Why do judges in our system wear robes?
Well, judges in our system wear black robes, and they started wearing black robes actually because Chief Justice John Marshall started the practice. In the beginning, justices used to wear colorful robes that identified them with the schools that they graduated from. And John Marshall, at his investiture, decided to wear a simple black robe. And pretty soon the other justices followed suit, and now all judges do it. And I think the black robe shows that justice is blind. We all dress the same. And I think it shows that once we put it on, we are standing united symbolically, speaking in the name of the law, not speaking for ourselves as individuals.
Thank you. You, in your questioning from Chairman Graham this morning, talked a little bit about the process of judicial decision making, and you started with 4 steps and then added a 5th, and then I think added a 6th. Because it turns out being a reactive branch is really reactive. Can you explain what it means that the judiciary, the Article 3 branch, is reactive?
So Article 3 of the Constitution says that courts can hear cases or controversies. So a judge can't walk in one day and say, I feel like, visiting the question of healthcare and telling people what I think. We can't even think about the law or how it would apply until litigants bring a real live case with real live parties and a real live dispute before us. And the material that we have to decide that dispute is what comes from you. It's the statutes that you pass. We don't get to come up with the policies and see our wishes become part of the United States Code. So we react to the litigants who bring cases before us, and we apply the laws that you make.
And what are the steps inside those Article 3 courts before it would ever get to a situation where the Supreme Court hears cases? What is unique about the Supreme Court?
So the Supreme Court obviously sits atop the federal hierarchy of the judiciary. And the Supreme Court, so my court now, the 7th Circuit, every time someone loses in the district courts, which are the trial courts, they can appeal. And we take every single appeal that comes. The Supreme Court works differently. The Supreme Court takes cases when it needs to. Most frequently, the reason it takes them is to resolve a division among the courts of appeal or the state Supreme Courts. The Supreme Court gets about 8,000 petitions a year, and they hear about 80 cases a year. So it's discretionary what cases to take.
So it's reactive, it's a reactive branch, and it's after a process where there's a statute, it's been challenged, there are active cases, and then it works its way up to the court. But when the justices decline to take a case, what are they saying? What are they're saying you don't matter and you don't have a right to appeal? What are they saying to the litigants in a case when they decline to grant cert?
They're not expressing any view on the merits. They're simply saying this isn't a case that we're going to put on our docket for certiorari because the court has obviously limited time and limited resources, and so it selects the cases where it's resolving a division, for example, in the courts or some other question on which of national importance on which the Supreme Court needs to step in.
There has been a lot of discussion in some of the questioning earlier this morning implicitly about standing. Can you just explain what standing is so that the American people understand it?
Yes. So this dovetails with your question about the judiciary being a reactive branch. So as I said, the Constitution gives the courts, the federal courts, the power only to decide actual live cases and controversies. So not only can we wake up one morning and volunteer our views, because the Constitution prohibits us from giving what are called advisory opinions. We can't just dispense advice or give our views on the law, which is one reason why I'm not able to answer some of the questions being asked today. A litigant can't get us to give an advisory opinion or elicit a view unless the litigant actually has a real case. So you, Senator Sass, couldn't walk into court and file a lawsuit and just ask me to give my advice on whether some particular statute was constitutional. I can only decide that question if there is an actual dispute about it.
You mentioned living constitutionalism a little bit ago. I think Chief Justice Warren had a much broader view of standing than some of the folks that have influenced your thinking and writing. Can you walk us through a little bit of the history of the court's view of standing over the last few decades?
So are you thinking about how broadly, like when a plaintiff has suffered an injury or that's a concrete injury?
Right.
So Senator Sass, if you came into court and you were objecting to a particular statute and you didn't like a particular statute, you would have to actually suffer what's called a concrete injury. So the Supreme Court a few terms ago in a case called Spokio said that a plaintiff lacks a concrete injury if the harm isn't, let's see, to use words the American people might understand, palpable. Like it can't just be a procedural injury or something that didn't actually have real consequence or real effect on the litigant. I think that the dispute about standing, or the difficult thing in deciding questions of standing, and the Spokio opinion lays this out, is deciding when an injury is concrete and courts can hear it, or when that injury is more abstract and designed to elicit an advisory opinion from the court.
You said in your opening comments yesterday that it is not the responsibility of the courts to right every wrong in society. I want to ask you a question about it, but first, can you just remind us what your view is there? Why did you say that?
So I think probably what I was getting at there, although I have to say, Senator Sass, so much has happened since I gave the opening statement yesterday. Courts, because they are reactive, can't reach out to right wrongs that don't come to them in the case, in the situation of a case or controversy. And then even if they come to courts in the situation of a case or controversy that a court can legitimately decide, we're not free to just resolve it like Solomon in the way that we think is wisest. So we are only free to address wrongs and decide cases in accordance with democratically elected law. So the policy making is yours to do, and it is only if you have enacted policies that enable us to right a wrong that we can do so.
So you still said, though, that you view it as some of your responsibility on the Seventh Circuit to right every opinion, every judgment from the standpoint of the losing party. Explain to us why you take that perspective of wanting the losing party to understand the law and the argument.
So I just write the opinion as I would write the opinion. And then after I write the opinion, I read it from the perspective of the losing party, because I want to make sure that, like I said earlier, it's a check on me to make sure that if I try to put my emotions or my preferences on the other side, that I can see that it's been a balance just strictly driven by legal analysis. I also want to make sure that the language in it is very respectful to the party who will ultimately be disappointed. I don't know if is that responsive to.
Yeah, because why I want to ask this is because I'm in my 5th year here, or a little over 5 years, and I'm on my 4th year on this committee. And pretty much you're the 3rd Supreme Court nominee to come before the committee during that time. And we've had dozens of appellate court nominees. And I've been amazed how many times the argument is American people be really, really scared. The person sitting before us obviously hates people and wants sick people to die and not have health care coverage. That's sort of an argument that's routine around here. It's been focus grouped, obviously, as a good way to demonize nominees to the court and hopefully drive outcomes in elections, I guess. I don't understand it. I think it's terribly destructive of the civic health. And yet I think about it from the standpoint of thoughtful, well-meaning Nebraska Democrats who hear that, and they know I have a different policy view than they might on getting to portability in healthcare so people can keep their health insurance across job and geographic change, because that's actually what's driving uninsurance in America over the last few decades. It's not primarily health status. It's not primarily pre-existing conditions or socioeconomics. The number one driver of uninsurance in American public life is that we change jobs a lot more frequently than we used to. And so I have a different policy solution of how we would get to portability in healthcare than a lot of my Democratic colleagues. But those are policy disputes about a modern economy where people move around a lot, both geographically and in terms of employer-sponsored health insurance relationships. Those contracts are not really the things that a nominee coming before the court is supposed to opine on, because I don't have any idea what your views are on healthcare, but I know that it's not really the job of a judge to reflect on those things. And so I want to be sure that folks who hear this hearing and at the end of the process, they can have trust that you're not a person who really wishes secretly you could be the queen of all healthcare and decide all these issues. And so when you write your opinion, it seems to me that one of the really humble things you're doing is you're saying, in every case that's come before me on the 7th Circuit, I want to write this opinion from the standpoint of the losing party to understand what was the question before the court today and how did the court rule on that specific narrow thing. Because ultimately, I think you would believe, given your jurisprudential tradition and given your view of judicial modesty and humility and your Scalia mentorship, my guess is there are times when you rule in cases where you go home at night and you take off your robe and you think the outcome is not the outcome you wish had been the case, but it wasn't your job to ultimately decide all policy in American life. It was to decide the specific question before you. And it seems to me the humble, empathetic way that you write those opinions is really important. It should be in the interest of public trust and American people who might listen to a lot of the demagoguery that implies that really you're just secretly a policy actor. It should be pretty comforting to them that, except for probably Justice Breyer, you've written more than, I think, than anybody who's currently on the court. So people can actually know your jurisprudential views and how you're going to approach cases when you get on the court, because you've written a ton. There's a reason why the Notre Dame faculty, regardless of their policy positions, wrote a letter to this committee universally recommending you. There's a reason why year after year on the Notre Dame law faculty, you were professor of the year, because students, regardless of their policy views, thought you were really good at explaining what the job of a judge is and what the purpose of Article 3 in our constitutional system is. And as somebody who worries a lot about institutional trust and a lot of the attacks that we see on the court, a lot of the attempts we see in this language about potentially court packing, if we would go to 11 or 13 or 15 or a Venezuelan style 47-person court over the next couple of election cycles, that undermining, that delegitimizing of the courts should have as its antidote the fact that you have written a ton about what you think the job of a judge is, and people can actually understand it. And I would hope that that's some of what this hearing would try to unpack. I am nearly out of time, and I think the chairman is going to take away my slot. So I want to ask one final thing. Tell us about the Scalia-Ginsburg friendship and the impact that it made on you.
So Justice Scalia famously, when the vacancy came up,
we're channeling the minds of the founders and the framers, the people who wrote the Constitution. We know what they were thinking. That's what Scalia used to say. Well, when that got attacked for being like, these religious freaks on TV who say, I know what Jesus believes, then they changed it and they said, no, we're interpreting it. And this is what Barrett said today. We are interpreting the law in the context, or the Constitution rather, they're interchangeable, in the context of the times, of what the average person understood. So, yeah, we're going to ban abortion, even though in 1787, there were ads in the newspapers advertising abortion. We're going to interpret anti-discrimination laws, even though at the time of the founding of the Republic, slavery was legal and appeared in a half a dozen places, not a half, 3 or 4 places in the Constitution. Obviously, go ahead, John.
Dred Scott's decision was another one that said that, there was no law that a white man had to respect towards a black person, since the black person was property and not a person. And if we keep going into this, what they call a strict interpretation rather than loose and up to date, we're going to be in trouble with this nominee, in my opinion.
Yeah. Oh, she's going to be a real problem on the bench. And, along with the other Federalist Society supported judicial nominees that came out of this dark money pool that Sheldon Whitehouse points out of $250 million that right-wing billionaires and giant corporations have invested in order to get basically, I think corporate friendly is the thing that's really the critical thing here, more than anything else. Thanks a lot for the call, John. Kathy in Waldport, Oregon. Hey, Kathy, got a minute to the break. What's up?
Okay. Her response to Ted
hey,
Cruz's...
Kathy, I'm sorry. I'm going to put you on hold. Senator Chris Coons the Democrat, just got up. So let's just go to Chris Coons here.
Most of us are wearing masks. There are a number of members of this committee and the Senate who've been infected by COVID, as our president has. And that's resulted in the Senate being closed this week and are not being able to proceed. We're in the middle of a pandemic. And we are just 3 weeks from an election, a presidential election in which folks are voting in more than 40 states. Millions of votes have already been cast. And just a week after that election, the Supreme Court's going to hear a case that could take away health care protections from more than half of all Americans. So this is not an abstract academic argument. It's one that will have real life consequences. Destroying the essential protections of the Affordable Care Act, which was enacted just more than a decade ago, would have a real impact on a majority of all Americans. It prevents insurance companies from discriminating against the more than 100 million Americans with pre-existing conditions like diabetes or heart disease. It dramatically expanded Medicaid, and it provides coverage for kids on their parents' insurance up to the age of 26, I should say young adults. And perhaps most importantly, since a lot of what we've been talking about is the legacy of Justice Ginsburg and her lifelong commitment to gender equity, it also prevents insurance companies, the Affordable Care Act does, from discriminating against women just for being women. It may be hard to imagine now, but more than a decade ago, before the ACA, pregnancy was treated as a pre-existing condition, and women were routinely charged more than men just because insurance companies could. So President Trump, he said over and over again that he is determined to repeal the Affordable Care Act, that he is determined to overthrow it. And there's two things all of us are waiting for. One is his detailed health plan. The other is his taxes. And I don't expect either one of them in the next 3 weeks. The president tried to do it here in Congress. In fact, I think by one count, my colleagues have voted 70 times to overturn the ACA. And many in this chamber, many members of this committee, members like Senators Cornyn and Lee and others, have filed amicus briefs before the Supreme Court asking for the law to be struck down. So now on the eve of the election, I believe President Trump is making a last gasp attempt to get the Supreme Court to do it for him. He can't do it through the democratic process. He can't do it administratively. He's going to try and do it with one more challenge. And as you well know, Judge, it was upheld 8 years ago in a 5-4 decision where Chief Justice Roberts wrote a critical, decisive piece of the majority opinion. But Justice Scalia, for whom you're clerked, your mentor, whose broad philosophy you embrace, dissented. he thought it was unconstitutional and voted to strike down the entirety of the law. You wrote an article in Constitutional Commentary in 2017 in which you were quite critical of Chief Justice Roberts' decision. And so I want to ask you about that article, not as a matter of debating abstract academic principles, but because I believe the outcome in this case a week after the election may hang in the balance. You wrote in that article, and I quote, in NFIB versus Sebelius, the case that upheld the ACA against a constitutional challenge, Chief Justice Roberts pushed the Affordable Care Act beyond its plausible meaning to save the statute. I think those are fighting words as an originalist and a textualist. You were referring to Chief Justice Roberts' ruling that the individual mandate in the ACA is constitutional under Congress's taxing powers, a ruling essential to upholding the law and protecting the health care of a majority of Americans. So just if you could, do you think the Chief Justice's ruling upholding the ACA was implausible and unsound?
Well, Senator Coons, what I said in that article, which was a book review of someone else's book, was that the statutory interpretation, as I said earlier, as Chief Justice Roberts' own opinion said, was the less natural reading of the mandate, construing it as a tax rather than a penalty, that the statutory interpretation seemed, as you said, stretched beyond its plausible meaning. But NFIB versus Sebelius turned on the constitutional question. That was the statutory interpretation was the threshold question.
Right.
And the constitutional question was not something that I ever opined on. And the case next week, or the case that's coming down the pike in a few weeks, California versus Texas, I wouldn't say they're fighting words from the article that you read from me, because the California versus Texas case involves a very different issue, this issue of severability. And for those to be fighting words, I think you would have to assume that my, critique of the reasoning reflects a hostility to the act that would cause me to approach a case involving the ACA with hostility and looking for a way to take it down, to deprive people of their coverage under the ACA because I didn't like it. But I can promise you that that is not my view. It's not my approach to the law. I have no hostility to the ACA or any other law, and that I will faithfully apply the law. And nothing that I've said with respect to the ACA in print in my law review articles actually bears on the severability question. So it's not indicative of how I might approach that question.
Let me go back to what I perhaps too jokingly referred to as fighting words. You're both textualists. You're both from the same general school of constitutional methodology, correct?
You mean Justice Scalia and me?
And Chief Justice Roberts.
I'm not actually sure that Chief Justice Roberts has ever identified himself as a textualist.
So to that point, in this article 3 years ago, you chastised Chief Justice Roberts for not being a textualist. You said he has not proven himself to be a textualist and has been willing to depart from ostensibly clear text. And so you said in this article, and I'm quoting you, it is illegitimate for the court to distort either the Constitution or a statute to achieve what it deems a preferable result. So this was the sort of outcomes-oriented judicial crafting that has often been sharply criticized by your mentor, Justice Scalia, when criticizing the sort of living constitutionalists. And as I read this, you are saying to Chief Justice Roberts, you're no textualist. You have overreached. You have delivered an implausible conclusion. And frankly, I disagree with your upholding the constitutionality of this statute. That seems to me, again, as a textualist here, a plain reading of your own writing.
Well, Senator Coons, I want to make very, very clear, I think maybe this came up with Senator Klobuchar, that I was not attacking or, chastising. I think this passage that you're talking about in this book review and constitutional commentary was maybe a couple paragraphs, maybe even one paragraph at the end, because it was a comment on Randy Barnett's book, and a lot of his book dealt with the NFIB versus Sebelius as an example. So I was responding to that. And the sentence that you read me about it's illegitimate for a court to twist language in pursuit of a policy goal, that is what I think. That's what I was telling Senator Sass. I mean, I don't think it is the job of courts to pursue policy goals that the text that you enact doesn't support.
So to be clear, you're specifically accusing the Chief Justice, or you're chastising might be the better word, the Chief Justice of distorting the statute and of upholding it when it should have been struck down.
No, I'm not. I was not. I said I was not chastising. All I was doing was expressing some, well, I mean, and as I've said several times, it's how the Chief Justice himself characterized it. It's not the most natural reading of that language. And all I was doing
if I might, Your Honor, I don't think the Chief Justice would agree with that characterization. He didn't describe his own opinion as not plausible.
He said less natural, and
Less
I
natural.
thought it was implausible.
But not unsound.
So Senator Coons, I certainly would not and did not criticize or chastise the Chief Justice or impugn his integrity. It is true that Chief Justice Roberts and Justice Scalia took different approaches to the text in the Affordable Care Act case, which is something that's widely acknowledged.
I'm simply trying to make clear that I think your writing here in 2017 in constitutional commentary, yes, the majority of it is a book review about a book that centrally talks about NFIB versus Sebelius and methodological questions. But near the end, you are, I think, unmistakably clear in saying, I disagree with the Chief Justice's ruling upholding the Affordable Care Act, and I deem it unplausible and unsound.
Senator, as an academic, I did express a critique. And you've quoted the language, you've pulled out those few sentences at the end. I guess I'm a little uncertain what it indicates, because as I've said, I have no hostility to the ACA, and if a case came up before me presenting a different question to the ACA, I would approach it with no bias or hostility. I also have said at earlier points in this hearing that the exercise of being a commentator, an academic, is much different than the enterprise of judging. And I didn't have to sit in Chief Justice Roberts' seat or Justice Scalia's seat when NFIB versus Sebelius was decided. So
but you will, if we follow the timeline laid out by my colleagues, you will sit in former Justice Ginsburg's seat. And you will sit as a member of the court deciding a case that is very similar to the previous one, in which the central issue before the court, believe it or not, somehow will be the constitutionality of the mandate that's in some ways been the linchpin of its being upheld previously in NFIB versus Sebelius. That was the sort of key point, was that at the end of the day, there were 5 justices who, for different reasons, concluded that they could uphold it in the case of the Chief Justice as a legitimate exercise of the taxing power. You wrote, and this is the next sentence, that Chief Justice Roberts, if he had treated the payment owed under the mandate as the statute did, as a penalty, he would have had to invalidate it. So I think you're unmistakably criticizing this decision to uphold the Affordable Care Act in a case that will be before you as a newly seated member of the Supreme Court if the majority continues with this race towards your confirmation. It is the nerve center of the case. The entire future of the Affordable Care Act, I think, hinges on this question of whether or not you share a view with the 4 who were in the minority at the time, that this is something that cannot be upheld under any plausible reading of the statute. Let me move on, if I might. Judge Barrett, you're not the only person who's criticized Chief Justice Roberts for his decision to uphold the ACA. President Trump criticized him for it sharply and repeatedly. Soon after the NFIB decision first came out in 2012, he tweeted that Justice Roberts turned on his principles with irrational reasoning in order to get loving press. And then later, congratulations to John Roberts for making Americans hate the Supreme Court because of his BS. A few years later, while running for president, then candidate Trump said on Twitter, and I believe my colleague put this up earlier, if I win the presidency, my judicial appointments will do the right thing, unlike Bush's appointee, John Roberts, on Obamacare. And as recently as just 2 months ago, Vice President Pence described Chief Justice Roberts as, and I'm quoting, a disappointment to conservatives.
A conversation, and we can do this later in the week, about what do we do in a world where there's no Roe v. Wade and where the Affordable Care Act has been struck down and where the Supreme Court starts striking down all kinds of laws that protect the rights of workers and your right not to be polluted and any kind of legislation that might restrain the actions of billionaires. Anyhow, we're wrapping it up today. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. Get out there, get active. Today might be the last day to register in your state. It is here in Oregon. So check iwillvote.com. Tag your it.
Listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Gabi.com. Gabi takes the pain out of insurance shopping. More info at Gabi.com/Tom. Bowl and Branch Sheets, crafted for the common good. More info at bowlandbranch.com, code Tom. CB Distillery for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code Tom. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. And Teeth, Smarter Pet Dental Health. For more information, teethhealth.com, code Tom.